What's up, movie friends? Welcome back to Raiders of the Lost podcast. I'm Anthony.
And I'm James. This is episode 36. We're going to do a director spotlight on David Fincher. And if it sounds a little different if you're listening to this podcast, because we got an audio upgrade, we have some new microphones. And if you're watching on YouTube, we're wearing headphones now because we want to seem a little more legit and so we can actually hear ourselves a little better. But we have upgraded the audio situation. We've been using all the funds we've been getting from Patreon. So thank you so much to everyone who's supporting us in helping us grow the show.
Thanks so much, guys.
And we've talked about David Fincher before, specifically in depth on that Gone Girl episode. We did Gone Girl versus Prisoners, and we also talked about him briefly in our serial killer episode when we talked about Seven. And we'll try not to be too repetitive when we go over those two films because we're going to go over his entire filmography here. But we will be going movie by movie in his filmography, in depth on each one, because it's an illustrious career. He's a phenomenal director. He's one of the best working today. He's one of my probably top 10 working today, in my opinion, and I can't wait to talk about him.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his filmography, the majority of his films deserve to have their own episodes on this podcast, just featuring just the standalone films. Has had a profound effect on cinema itself over the last 25 years that he's hands down one of the most important filmmakers working today.
And as always, spoilers are abound, so warning, if you haven't seen any of these movies and you want to skip spoilers, I would just bounce around through the episode. This is going to be a long one, and there's 10 films total, I believe, so there's...
Plus TV shows.
Yes, plus we're going to talk a little bit about his TV shows, so there's plenty to talk about, and if you haven't seen them all, you can bounce around. David Fincher was born in 1962 in Denver, Colorado. At age 2, his family moved to San Anselmo, where he was neighbors with George Lucas. His family then moved to Oregon, and while in high school, Fincher would direct school plays and worked as a projectionist and production assistant part-time at a TV studio. His professional career started as a visual effects producer on George Lucas's animated film Twice Upon a Time, and then as an assistant cameraman and matte photographer on Return of the Jedi and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. His first directorial job was a documentary for musician Rick Springfield. Fincher first gained recognition for directing music videos, specifically for Madonna's hits Express Yourself and Vogue. His first feature was Alien 3, or Alien Cubed if you want to be a sophisticated person, in 1993. Besides Madonna, Fincher has also directed music videos for Michael Jackson, George Michael, the Rolling Stones, Jay-Z, and Justin Timberlake. His 10 films have received 30 Oscar nominations, including 2 nominations for himself as Best Director for The Social Network and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Fincher also served as a showrunner for House of Cards and Mindhunter. Now let's get into what makes David Fincher such a great director. And as a director, in my opinion, he's basically a surgical technician. He's very precise, very skilled. He's probably the most knowledgeable person on every single set he's ever been on. His attention to detail, his specificity is all off the charts, and he really lets you dive into his stories and makes them seem so real.
Being a director, you're basically in charge of a group of artists, and you're overseeing each department of a film, and you're the lead on this big collaboration. And so a director necessarily doesn't have to be an expert on cameras, doesn't have to be an expert on lighting, editing, production design. What they do is the team hires experts in their fields and they all collaborate. But I feel that David Fincher is one of the rare directors where it seems as though because he's so controlled in his filmmaking, he is an expert at all of those fields. And he gets the best out of every part of the production because he probably knows as much as each of the parts of the crew.
Yeah, it's probably similar to like him and like Alfonso Cuarón. You can probably say is around that category too, since he's actually been nominated for an Oscar for Roma for cinematography, let alone directing too.
Yeah.
So there are some filmmakers that also, I'm sure they can be a little controlling on set because they want a lot of say in what happens in the film. But again, like you just said, they're in charge of the entire creative direction of the film. That's the point of a director. Not everyone's an expert in every category. Most directors are generally delegating to specific people in productions, different areas of the production. But I highly doubt that Fincher is like up there holding a boom mic. But yeah. I mean, he might be like planning the camera work and lighting a little more than someone else.
That is a testament to Fincher's theory with filmmaking, where some directors, they focus more on, it's like Woody Allen's. It's all about the writing, all about dialogue. Some directors are all about big effects and bombasting you with great imagery. But with Fincher, everything matters. Every aspect of the production is as important as the other. So the performance of the actor is just as important as how well the audio sounds, and which is just as important as the dolly move the camera makes, which is just as important as how exactly the set looks. So nothing is more important than anything else, which is why he's so controlling as a filmmaker, because the entire image as a whole has to work in cohesion with each other. So all these parts have to come together, and they need to be pretty much at the same peak level at the same moment in order to create the image the moment that he wants. Everyone needs to be like perfect, every part of the process of filmmaking.
Yeah, and his attention to detail is off the charts, like we said earlier, and you can tell this in pretty much every scene in every one of his movies. It seems like it's just been taken out of the real world, and these characters are filling that space as well. And he has this unnatural ability to take a straightforward script and turn it into something magnificent or disturbing, or both at the same time. And his editing style helps him pace his films in a very unique style, where his movies, whether they be 3 hours long, which some of them are pretty close to, they still keep you on the edge of your seat.
The way he shoots and edits is pretty unique in regards to other filmmakers. For example, he took a 2-page scene in The Social Network in one of the deposition rooms, and it's just a 2-shot between Zuckerberg and one of the lawyers having a small conversation. And it's a small moment, but in most filmmakers would probably film it with a master and then maybe a medium and close-up of each actor, so that would be 5 shots in total for the 2 pages. But Fincher, for this scene, he filmed 16 different shots of just these 2 characters, and then he cut it together into 36 different edits within about a 2.5-minute section of the movie. And so he's a filmmaker who enjoys getting as much coverage and as many angles, as many looks as possible in every scene, as a way to exhaust all of the possibilities and ideas that you could have, rather than just sticking to the rigid, typical template of, I'm going to film a master, wide, and a close-up, and then that's it. He's like, I need to get a shot here, I need to get a shot there. What about putting the camera there? And so he tries all these unique angles and styles in order to craft his scenes, which sets him apart, I think, visually than most directors.
Yeah, the way he shoots kind of like mundane or typical scenes is really effective and unique. Like, again, Social Network, real quick, another example is the scenes of Mark typing in his bedroom, creating that face smash program. I mean, he shoots keyboards in a very interesting way. And then even that rowing race in that scene, he shoots it like very shallow depth of field with his cameras, weird close-ups up on the rowers' faces, mounts the cameras on the sides of the boats, as well as very large wide shots. So he takes like a normal scene that, pretty much most directors would do in the same way, and just does his own David Fincher spin on it.
Yeah, exactly. And also Dragon Tattoo involves a lot of computers and a lot of investigating and reading and going through files and paperwork, but he's still, if you think of Dragon Tattoo, would you call it visually stunning?
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And then half of the movie's people researching.
Yeah, and Zodiac too.
Yeah, Zodiac as well. So he has this knack for creating visuals that elevate what's happening in the story. And I think one of the most definitive aspects to his camera work is the perfection of his camera. How when the camera moves, it seems to move perfectly. It's always on this dolly track, or it is pushing forward, or it's just static on a tripod, moving, panning, and tilting. And his cameras, 99.9% of the time, have this perfect quality to them. Things that are happening on screen were like kind of always going to happen, and it was already planned out. That's why the camera has that perfect movement. And the way he moves his camera is actually very specific to the movement of his actors, whatever the subject of the frame is. So if you watch a Fincher film, his camera will always follow exactly to the T the movement of the actor. So if a character is walking across an environment, the camera will exactly match their pace, their velocity, and their speed. And if a character sits up from a chair, the camera will push up with them. And it'll even follow the movements of an actor's head. So if it's just like a medium shot of someone sitting down, if the actor, for example, is looking downward and then the actor looks upwards, the camera will literally match that action and slowly tilt upwards, so that the camera is an extension of the character and follows precisely the movements of the main character, which makes you engage with the character more so as an audience member.
And when he films, he's also a master of hiding CGI in plain sight and special effects in plain sight. Obviously, he's he's very experienced with groundbreaking special effects with films like The Social Network, where he created twins using Armie Hammer and a double, and then specifically in The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, where they had to age and de-age Brad Pitt throughout an entire person's life, so doing old versions and young versions of him.
Yeah, and it's not like it's something like a big action sci-fi superhero movie. It's these special effects are kind of hidden in plain sight, like you said.
Yeah, like so, like generally when we're inside a house or apartment, he's got green screen on the windows and he's creating a CGI world outside of the house or the windows. Specifically, we've talked about that on Gone Girl, and he also does this effect, which I've talked about before, but I want to do real quick, where he does this double shot editing technique, where a lot of the time when he has two characters on camera at the same time, not always, but generally there's a good amount of scenes where he'll put space between them in the center of the frame. This allows him to use different takes of the same shot to create the best shot that he thinks is best for the scene. So maybe he'll take use take 12 from Rooney Mara's aspect, and maybe take 15 from Mark Zuckerberg or Jesse Eisenberg's side, and put those together into one shot, so that it gives him a lot of diversity in what he wants to use. And so that for him, like he likes to use, like you said, he uses so many different shots and so many different takes to get what he needs and what he wants.
I mean, sometimes a scene works great as a two-shot, but the problem is maybe one actor's performance isn't quite up to par with maybe the performance they put on an hour ago in a different take. He's able to put the best moment of each character into the scene, which saves him from having to worry about the performances. And also another thing that Fincher has always done is traditionally films are shot with one camera, and they'll shoot one side of the scene, light it, set up the production, and they'll film that actor's side. And then when they're wrapped with that actor's part of the scene, they'll move the production on the other side, and then they'll relight for the other actor, and then they'll shoot that actor's scene, and then they cut it together. But he sees that as extremely time-consuming and kind of a waste. And so he's always shot his scenes with at least two cameras rolling at the same time. And this gives him the ability to, first of all, get as much coverage as possible by filming as many takes as he's known for, because he doesn't have to worry about resetting the set, lighting for the other side of the room. He just lights the room and shoots everything. And then also, the more you shoot, the more scenes the more times the actors can act the scene out. And so that gives him more options editing-wise to choose from their acting, because maybe you're filming one actor, and if you're only using one camera, maybe the other actor did something great on a take, but you're not even filming. So this way, he's filming everything at all times, so he can capture all the coverage he wants.
And the reason why Fincher was able to now develop the style of shooting so many takes and two cameras at once, maybe sometimes three cameras at once, is he was one of the early mainstream filmmakers in Hollywood and probably internationally to start using digital cameras and high-def cameras in the early 2000s. And I think the first film he did with digital cameras was Zodiac. And this was groundbreaking because obviously it took a while for high-definition cameras to at least match film. And, we saw it with 28 Days Later, where Danny Boyle used digital cameras, and it had a unique look to it, but it wasn't in terms of quality.
I don't even think it was HD yet.
Yeah, it was maybe
1280.
I think it was HD. It was like DSLRs he was using. But Fincher finally, they had this new high-def format, not quite what they have today with 8K and 4K cameras and Reds and Dragons. But
it wasn't. He didn't start using 4K until Social Network, so it was just standard HD for Zodiac, which is crazy.
And so this allowed Fincher to save money. He's not rolling film, and allowed him to, you can basically film as much as you want.
Yeah, and the thing with Fincher is obviously famous for using so many takes, and people think it's like he's like this drill sergeant who's just doing take after take after take, but it's not quite as bad as it's been made to seem, because like you just said, since he shoots digitally, he can just keep running the camera. He doesn't have to worry about changing the film, which takes between 5 to 10 minutes every time. He doesn't have to worry about resetting each scene for when they shoot the other side,
or running out of film.
So all they do is they light the room, whatever environment they're in, they light that, and then they shoot for 10 hours. And they don't have to worry about changing anything. They set the cameras up. And this allows him to do, he does all these takes because he doesn't have to change anything. He doesn't have to change the film. He doesn't have to change the set. And so that gives him the ability. It's not like these actors aren't working 18-hour days. They're still working the same amount of days, same amount of hours. But typically on a film set, an actor will be there for like 10 to 12 hours, but they'll be filming on screen for maybe 2 hours in total, acting, because so much time is spent for actors waiting for the set to get ready, waiting for the light to get ready, waiting for the cameras to change, the film to change. So they spend most of their time actually waiting around on set. But with Fincher, if they're there, they're filming and they're acting in front of the camera, and he wants them to act as long as he can possibly have them each single day. So he wants his actors to act for like 8 hours a day rather than the 2 hours a day.
Yo, they better act that long. I mean, you're getting paid $5 million a movie.
Yeah.
You better not complain about working 8 hours of acting, 10 hours of acting.
Yeah, and also the theory behind why he does numerous takes actually makes a lot of sense, because he makes it so that, so say for example you're an actor and they're filming in a set which is supposed to be your home. You as the actor, you're walking on that set for the first time. You've never been there before. And this is supposed to be a place where your character has been living for a while. And like, say for example, you have to go and get something out of your fridge, and that's the action you have to do in the scene. Well, typically when that happens, the actor is doing that for obviously the first time they've ever opened that particular fridge in that particular setting. Obviously, like, they'll do the best they can to make it seem like they've done this 1,000 times, but it still doesn't look like they've done that act 1,000 times.
Yeah, but that theory only applies to in like that kind of situation, that kind of scene, like rather than if they're investigating a crime scene and that they're never have supposed to.
No, that's the point, because he'll have his actors do the same action, like a mundane act, like that 50 times. So he's having them do takes like that as well, because he wants it to feel like this is that character's home, and they've made this a cup of coffee here 1,000 times, so it has to look like it. And so he'll have them do take after take after take to make them feel like, to create this authenticity to their performance, to make them do the act again. And the same thing applies to the acting, where actors come into each scene with the preparation that they've had. They've done their homework, and they have a plan for how they want to execute their scenes. Obviously, they'll be open to collaboration. But Fincher, taking the same theory of having them perform the same action over again to make it even redundant and more natural, he does the same thing with the acting, where he has the actors act out the scenes over and over and over and over again to get to this point where everything they had planned and set before they got on set is thrown out the window, and they're just in the moment coming up with a new kind of performance each time, and it becomes more authentic the more times they do it.
Fincher seems to be drawn to specific characters and specific stories, and he seems to be fascinated with the perversions of human beings. He likes to open us to the worlds of unorthodox characters,
serial killers,
do bold things like serial kill, whether it be start a fight club, frame your spouse for murder, age in reverse. He seems to have also, like you just said, a fascination with serial killers, and he in my opinion, he probably made the best fictional serial killer movie, as well as the best real factual serial killer movie with Seven and Zodiac.
Well, like we've talked about before, everyone's drawn to these kinds of characters. That's why. What's the most popular podcast in the world? The true crime one?
For true crime podcast, Crime Junkies is number one. And true crime podcasts are just on fire anyways.
Yeah, and there's so many movies about killers and investigations. There's so many cop shows and detective shows. There is a fascination with the dark side of humanity, and I think Fincher is not afraid to explore that, and he's not afraid to explore the perverse nature of people, because on the surface, people generally seem to have similar interests and nothing too extreme, but behind closed doors, you don't really know people, and people are into all sorts of strange things, strange compared to maybe the societal norms that we're used to. And so he's not afraid to show those facets of reality and those kinds of people and those kinds of stories. And I think that he's just fascinated in how dark people can become. Another aspect to his filmmaking is he rarely uses close-ups. If you watch his films, he mostly films with wide masters, mediums, medium closes, and he rarely uses the close-up. And when he does use the close-up, it's for a very particular reason, where he's trying to point out that this moment here is very important, and so you have to pay attention to it. And so I think most filmmakers, they use close-ups because they look nice, and they're not really using it for any kind of storytelling device, which he uses it for a specific purpose, not just because it looks cool, but because you need to really pay attention to this right here. So that's why I'm doing a close-up of the shot. And it really contrasts with the rest of his films and really makes you pay attention to these moments.
Yeah, and Fincher also never writes movies that he directs. I think there's maybe one project he's written. I think it was a short film or video short. Aside from that, he never writes screenplays for the movies he directs. He never writes which obviously isn't unheard of. Obviously there are other directors like Chris Nolan who writes and directs pretty much only scripts that he comes up with and his ideas.
It's true, but that's not to say that he's not involved in the writing process of a film.
I'm not saying it's a con or anything.
But he's not actually credited as a writer, and he's not writing the script. But what happens when he signs on to a movie, he actually works with the screenwriter to change things and rewrite all the time. So he works as kind of like an editor of a magazine or an editor of a book, where he, for example, with Social Network, he worked with Aaron Sorkin for 3 weeks, and they changed numerous things in the screenplay to his liking. And Sorkin changed dialogue, he changed scenes, he changed moments, and they developed new ideas. So he collaborates with his screenwriters to change the script in a certain way that suits his vision that he has for the movie, so that when they're shooting, it's not shooting from the screenwriter's script, it's shooting from this new script that they collaborate on. And now, so no, he's not a writer, but he is very much involved in the rewriting of the scripts every single time.
Yeah, as most directors are, because again, as we said, they're in charge of the entire creative vision of the film.
Absolutely. Some things that are very synonymous with Fincher are his practical lighting. You always see where the lights are. Oftentimes in films, the lighting can be really beautiful, but you're like, where's this light coming from? It can be coming from impossible spaces in an environment. But Fincher always makes it visible, the lights that are producing the visuals in the scene. And as an audience member, that makes you feel more engaged, and it makes it seem more realistic, because you can see, oh, the light right there on the wall is providing the light in the room rather than some light off screen, some studio light. And then that engages you more with the environments and adds to the believability of the scenes. Another stylistic consistency with his films are the color palettes. He loves to use yellows and blues, obviously desaturated, but if you look at all of his films, it's a constant contrast between yellow tones and blue tones. And it's contrast, and yellow and blue are on completely opposite sides of the color wheel. So they're very engaged. Those colors are very engaging for us visually when they're on the screen together. And also they can reflect different facets of each character, the two sides of one coin for each character. So you'll always see yellows and blues in his films.
His opening titles are usually one of the most exciting parts of films, and also he pulls you into the mood of his films with his opening titles. He doesn't do it in every movie, but obviously the most bold one he ever did was for Seven. And then to contrast that, for a film like Gone Girl, his opening sequence is really just B-roll of a town to kind of give you a sense of where you are in this town in Missouri, in St. Louis.
Yeah.
And also he works a lot, obviously his most recent films, with the musicians Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, who've made some fantastic music for his movies and kind of just capture his vision for his films and the moods of his films so well. And Gone Girl's score is amazing. Social Network score is amazing. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. So they elevate his filmmaking to another level.
In most of his early films, he was working with composer Howard Shore, who is obviously very famous. He did Lord of the Rings, and he did a lot of Scorsese's movies as well. And the music in those films are fantastic. He did Panic Room, and he did Seven. But they still, I don't feel like no composer really matched the tone and style of Fincher's filmmaking as well as Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. And so I think that's why that music combined with his visuals just mesh together in amazing ways. And I think they'll constantly be scoring his work for the rest of their careers.
Except for Fight Club, and that music was made by this group called the Dust Brothers. I don't know if they're brothers or not. I don't know anything about them. But that music, I think, goes so well with that story and that movie.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I agree, yeah.
But that music is kind of... You can't listen to that score on its own. It's like the movie. It's erratic. It's at times brooding, but sometimes it's also in your face. It's violent, just like Fight Club is. So I think the Dust Brothers did a great job with Fight Club.
He actually tried to get Trent Reznor to score multiple films of his before Social Network, and it just never worked out because he was always working on Nine Inch Nails music or touring, so they were never able to get together. But Fincher tried to get him on pretty much all of his movies going back to Seven.
But I mean, he is the opening credits of Seven is the Nine Inch Nails.
Exactly. Another instance of filmmaking that he uses wisely is the use of handheld shots. And he uses handheld the same way he uses close-ups very rarely and for important reasons. And handheld shots he uses to show characters who are out of control or lack control in a situation. And when they happen, they're very jarring because the rest of the films are very controlled camera work, very, very precise, like we talked about. And some examples are the scene in John Doe's apartment when the phone's ringing and Mills is trying to find the phone. It's very shaky handheld because you're panicking with Mills as well. And then the head in the box scene, that's all shot handheld. Mills and Somerset, their camera angles are all handheld, but John Doe is still shot with a tripod and some statics because it's showing that he's in control of the situation, and then Mills and Somerset are completely out of control of the situation. In The Social Network, there's one handheld shot. It's Sean Parker at that party when the cops show up. It cuts to him, and it's handheld as he's walking into the other room and finds the police. And so it's a chaotic and panicked moment for him. And for us, we're feeling what he's feeling. And then in Dragon Tattoo, that escalator fight with Elizabeth and that guy who's trying to rob her. So these are just a handful of handheld shot moments that Fincher's used in his entire career. Just a handful.
Yeah, and there's another shot in Fight Club. I don't know if it's really handheld, but it's where it's Tyler Durden giving a speech. It's like halfway through the film, and it's like this intense close-up, and it's very stylized. Yeah, and he's looking in the camera. I don't know. I wouldn't say it's handheld. It's more like the lens is just shaking like crazy.
I think they did that in post.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that's handheld, but again...
Same idea.
Yeah.
But I mean, these are all things that make up a Fincher film. And like Wes Anderson, his style is immediately identifiable. And when you're watching a Fincher movie, you know it's a David Fincher movie just from the visuals alone.
Let's get into the filmography of David Fincher, starting in 1992 when he directed Alien 3, or if you're an intellectual, you can call it Alien Cubed, as it was advertised.
Oh my God, that's horrible marketing.
Yeah, the poster, it's like up there like a...
Oh
like
yeah, you're right. It's on the end.
This film had 5 screenwriters total, which is probably a testament to all the production problems that were involved with it. It starred returning as Ripley Sigourney Weaver, Charles Dutton, Charles Dance, and Paul McGann. This film had a worldwide box office of $159 million on a budget of $50 million. And this is the 3rd film in the Alien franchise. The fear is palpable as Ellen Ripley discovers a little too late that she has been stalked by a horrid creature. After crash landing on a desolate prison planet, the guards, inmates, and Ripley are fighting for their lives weaponless. However, the alien might not be the only danger.
So this film, anyone who is familiar with the history of the Alien franchise, and David Fincher, they know that 20th Century Fox ran this production into the ground, and they actually began production without an ending set in mind. And because there are 5 credited writers, the reason for that is they had actually 2 different scripts, and they pretty much put them together and gave them to Fincher, and were like, just work out a story between these 2 stories. And both of those scripts had a couple of writers, so that's why there's 5 writers in this one movie. And so from the get-go, right from the green light, this was like an impending disaster just waiting to happen.
And there were some odd ideas for how the story was going to go. Like you said, there was 2 scripts kind of put together, but even before that, there were even bolder ideas. Like one of the more popular ideas that they were working with was of this wooden planet of monks that had left Earth, and that Ripley was going to crash land into this wooden planet, and that was going to be the setup of the story.
A planet made out of wood?
Planet made out of wood.
That's not scientifically possible.
This was a real script. Apparently, the monks had some technology, but they used it to leave Earth and build this wooden planet, and the story was going to take place like that.
Do they have a wooden spaceship?
I don't know, man. But I'm just saying that's how this... I think with the Alien franchise, the problem was they were trying to be more bold or try to take it in new directions because it was so groundbreaking, the idea, and Ridley Scott's original movie. But this is Fincher's first film, and he had to deal with probably the most out-of-whack production and so many errors and mistakes, maybe not on his part, obviously on the studio's part. I mean, he had the studio executives over his shoulder telling him how to shoot things, telling him how to write things, telling him what to do. So he was kind of stuck in this back and forth of he couldn't maintain artistic integrity and control of the situation at all.
And what happened was after every day of shooting, he had to call the producers at Fox and tell them what they shot, why they shot it, and then what the plan was for tomorrow and why they were planning those scenes to shoot tomorrow. So he was literally kept on a leash by these producers. And I understand people are quick to bash executives, and ultimately their goal is to not make a piece of art. Their goal is to make the company money so they can keep making more movies, and so they don't have to like fire people. And it's a company. They're just trying to stay afloat, so they want to make as much money as possible while spending as little money as possible. But Fincher is the kind of filmmaker where he goes over budget and he goes over days. Every single one of his movies, it's gone over budget, and it's gone maybe twice as long as they had planned. That's just the filmmaker he is. And the thing with producers is, with a big budget movie like this, they're more focused on their date. They have a premiere date for this movie. They greenlight it, and they need it to come out at a certain date. The marketing's built around this date, and so their main goal is to make sure the movie is at least done in time to release it the way they have scheduled for the marketing. And so that's their number one priority.
Again, movies are investments. Yeah. That's the number one priority for any movie.
Yeah, and so that's the problem that happens with a situation like this, where you hire a strong artist who wants to take this movie in a artistic direction, but then the studio is constantly battling with them, and it became just an absolute mess of multiple parties trying to fight for power.
And you can see the potential in this film. Like, I don't hate this movie, but it is, at times it's erratic and doesn't seem like the story fits a lot of times. And it's highly stylized, and clearly you can see the talent of Fincher in terms of, you can see the start of his filmmaking. It's highly stylized,
great cinematography,
lots of contrast, great cinematography, the colors, lots of orange, lots of blues like we talked about earlier, or yellows. But it still can't overcome its biggest weakness, which is that thin script, which is the script that every day going to set, Fincher was getting a new version of the scenes that day that he didn't even know what dialogue was going to happen.
Yeah, and Alien actually has a weird history with directors, because the production of Ridley Scott was fine, and everything went smoothly, and the film was a huge success. But Ridley Scott was actually upset with Fox because when they greenlit the sequel, they didn't even ask him if he wanted to direct it. They went straight with James Cameron. And so Ridley Scott was actually, he said publicly that he was upset by the fact that they went with another director without even meeting with him. And so they've always had this strange relationship with directors in the Alien franchise, which it doesn't really make any sense. Like, how could you not ask the director of Alien to make the sequel?
Maybe James Cameron was going to do it on lower budget, who knows? Or on lower pay.
Could be something like that, yeah.
Because clearly they just only cared about money. And this film, it did do well in European and Asian markets, and there is an assembly cut, which is kind of like with Star Wars with the special editions, where they added 30 minutes to the film. They added a bunch of character development, which they had cut. But they also changed things up. They changed the ending, which I didn't really like either. But this film actually also spawned an alien adventure attraction in Glasgow called Alien War, where you would it's like this ride or this attraction at a theme park, and you'd go there with these soldiers would take you through this crazy environment, and you had to survive against the aliens. I guess it was pretty cool, but I think it only lasted a couple of years.
That's awesome. And it's not a perfect movie, and there are things that happen that I was not a fan of. For example, by killing Newton Hicks in the opening credits.
Ridiculous.
I mean, I understand you want to change things with the franchise, but those two characters were beloved in the second film, and just to have them die during the credits rolling, it just it was like a gut punch. And these two characters were very famous from the second film because Hicks became the leader of the soldiers who became Ripley's partner in taking down the alien, and then Newt was the young girl that they found in the space station, and Ripley became her protector in the film, so they developed a mother and daughterly kind of bond. And so you really loved these characters in the second film. They were part of the reason why the movie is so good.
And they just killed them with acid, going through through Newt's cage, and then the crash and everything.
Yeah, and it happens during the opening title sequence, and so they're not even at all in the movie. And I did not like that aspect of it.
Yeah, there are a lot of things in this movie not to like, but obviously the best part of the film was getting Sigourney Weaver to come back as Ripley, and she obviously came back on a huge fee. She got paid quite a lot.
How much?
I'm not sure exactly. But
I'm betting $20 million.
Probably a good amount. And she also ended up being a producer on the film, so she lended creative ideas to the story and dialogue. But this film still, like we just talked about, there's a lot to dislike about it. Specifically, I think the number one thing I dislike about it was the advertising. And they had this horribly cheesy tagline, which was called 3 times the suspense, 3 times the danger, 3 times the terror. Wow. 3 times the calories? What else are you going to add to that?
Are you kidding me?
And also, again, they called it Alien Cubed, which was so lame.
It's awful, man. That's an awful marketing campaign.
But again, this movie isn't horrible. And, I appreciate it, I think, more and more every time I've seen it. I think maybe only seen it 3 or 4 times, but I like it more each time.
I think one of the best parts about the movie is that Fincher introduced the POV shot of the alien. So when the alien is chasing people in this film, oftentimes he cuts to the POV, which is really fun to see from the point of view of the actual alien as it hunts. And also they included the aspect and the idea that the alien can take on traits of whatever host it takes. And so, for example, when it kills a dog and it is born from within a dog, for the rest of the film, that alien is moving on all fours the entire time.
Which they actually changed to an ox in the assembly cut.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's strange, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I think people reacted poorly to a dog being killed.
Maybe. That could be it.
Yeah.
And obviously, let's just set up the movie real quick. So she crash lands onto this planet, and it's a prison planet full of just men. And again, as the tagline and synopsis assumes, there's other danger besides the xenomorph alien, the new version of the alien that's hunting them all. Now, Ripley has to deal with being on this planet of men who are despicable, horrible human beings, all of them, who haven't seen a woman in whom knows how many years.
Yeah, and on top of that, they have no weapons for which to defend themselves from the alien.
Which I liked. I liked that they didn't do
that's a good conflict.
all the guns. Like, obviously, in the first one and second one, it's cool, but it's nice to get a change of pace and, let's do this without guns.
And this movie also has a lot of religious and sexual undertones and themes, whereas all of the inmates are actually led by the spiritual leader of the group. And there are a lot of metaphors that allude to religions, especially Catholicism. And I think the main idea they were going with was that the xenomorph is not just an alien, but it can be perceived as a demon more so. So I think it was interesting to take the direction of the franchise into a unique theme like that, because the first film was just a strict sci-fi horror movie. The second one was an action movie. Now this one was like a dark religious meditation on evil.
Yeah, it does have a very biblical vibe, because I think they wanted to stay like what I told you about that monk planet. I think it's kind of like that was part of this story too still, where they kept this religious tone to it, and this tone of an all masculine environment, like a man and a woman in a man's world kind of vibe, and sort of like Ripley became this Joan of Arc-esque character. There are even similarities between the two where, the voices, she's on this mission, she shaves her head, she dies by fire at the end, there's betrayal. So there are a lot of similarities between Ripley and Joan of Arc in this story.
You know what's really cool, a fun fact about just the alien in general, is that the writer who wrote the first Alien film, his entire mission and basis for creating the alien and the conflict in the movie was he wanted to figure out a way to make men in the audience feel as though they're witnessing sexual assault. And so in the first Alien film, the only people that are taken over by the alien and impregnated by the alien are men. And so the alien is a metaphor for sexual assault on men, because the alien literally sexually assaults these men by wrapping around their faces and sexually assaulting them orally, and then impregnating them with a baby. And so all the men in the alien universe are being sexually assaulted by the alien.
I never thought about that.
Crazy,
That's
huh?
intense. And this movie gets the reunion of Ripley with her xenomorph buddies. And I think we have one of the most iconic images, at least from this film in the Alien franchise, of Ripley. She's in the shower, right? And then the xenomorph comes onto the side of her and just like... and he tongues her neck and nuzzles her neck, and it's just it's terrifying, and it's one of the most scary. It's one of the scariest shots in the entire film.
And it doesn't kill her because it knows that there's a xenomorph impregnated within her.
Yeah.
So it's sparing her to help grow the baby. All in all, obviously it's not a perfect movie, but it is a really interesting sci-fi film, and I can see the potential that the story had and where where Fincher was trying to take this film and what he was trying to do. And unfortunately, he dealt with such bad interference that he ended up quitting filmmaking. He ended up quitting directing movies for several years because of this situation.
And this is a dark movie. It's bleak. It's kind of depressing. It's not even close to a happy ending. I think only one person on in the original cast survives.
Completely humorless.
And again, there's the assembly cut where they add a lot more, so we get to see more in terms of characterization, which was a major fault in the film, where you never really connected with anybody besides Ripley in the movie. but also the assembly cut changes things. Like I said, the ending, where spoiler alert, the ending in the theatrical version, Ripley is falling backwards into like that lava pit, and the alien chest bursts out of her, so she has it pop out of her chest while she's falling, and she grabs it, and she has this like odd motherly moment with this chest burster alien that just came out of her, and they're both falling to their death, and she just kind of holds it like she's a mom now,
It's like the end of Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah, except she kills it. And then, but in the assembly cut, they just have her fall, and nothing comes out of her. The alien doesn't pop out of her, and it doesn't look that great. It's kind of like cheesy CGI. They must have reshot or maybe used other footage, but
they probably just never finished it.
It just doesn't look that good, and I don't know why they would change that. Because I think that having her become a mother and killing the alien adds more to her humanity, because she's already sacrificing herself to just basically save everybody else, and to not let the alien go to the company who's just going to use it for research and probably develop weapons and more aliens out of it. So she's kind of trying to save humanity by sacrificing herself. And then why cut it? Why? Yeah. What would you add by cutting that?
I don't know. Still, this is better than Alien Resurrection.
I don't think that anyone should ever talk about that fucking movie unless you're just going to roast it the whole time. But yeah, it's watch it if you've never seen it, because you really get a taste of Fincher's style and where he's coming from, and like early taste of his direction, of his skill.
It's just an appetizer.
Yeah, just a little appetizer, make you hungrier before you eat.
Next up, we have Seven, which came out in 1995 and stars Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt, Kevin Spacey, Andrew Kevin Walker, and Gwyneth Paltrow. This film had a box office of $327 million on a budget of $33 million, so it was a gigantic success. Detective Somerset, soon to be retired, and young detective David Mills investigate a series of murders that seem to follow a pattern. The 7 deadly sins are at the heart of this case.
This is one of the best sophomore efforts you'll ever see from a filmmaker ever, and I can't believe that this is the second movie that Fincher made, because a lot of people consider this movie to be a masterpiece, and they consider it to be his best film. I don't think it's his best film. It's one of my favorite of his, but it's incredible, and I still think it's kind of underrated for all the praise it gets, because, this film is very dark. It's very gritty. He's showing you some gruesome things on camera, and for that, I think it's a big turnoff to a lot of people. Like a lot of movies that Fincher makes, you can see can be turnoffs for specific audiences, because when this was made, it's one of the darkest films that was ever put out in Hollywood.
It still is, and I've shown this film to a couple of people, and they were seriously disturbed by it, because that's what the nature of the film is. It's showing the most disturbing direction a person can go.
That's what Fincher wants. He wants you to feel uncomfortable. He wants you to have your insides turn. That's what he's going for.
Yeah, and what John Doe does in this movie is just the absolute furthest from what a decent human being is like. And so he's showing, it's like the ultimate telling of good versus evil, where it's not some supervillain, it's just a man. And I agree with you. I think that even though this movie is widely praised and loved, I still also agree it is still underrated, because I think this could be the best investigatory drama ever made. It's my favorite, and it could be one of the best cop movies ever made. And I think the success of this film and the popularity of it is what spawned this resurgence of crime TV shows, crime movies, TV shows like following serial killers, and it tapped into this desire of audiences to watch stories and ingest stories that involve murder and death.
And again, the perversion of humanity, which Fincher, again, is fascinated by. And despite this film being about a serial killer who commits a lot of acts of violence and death, there's only one scene in this movie where we see somebody get killed, just one time. So although it's about killings, and there are several killings, what we really see in terms of gore is the aftermath of the killing and what the killer has done and what John Doe does to his victims after he's done it.
Yeah, it would be a completely different film if you showed all of the acts take place, and also showing the acts would erase the mystery surrounding John Doe, because the fact that nobody knew that Kevin Spacey was in this movie, they kept him out of the marketing campaign. They kept him out of the opening credits. He wasn't in the trailer. He didn't do any promotion. And so the filmmakers and producers completely knocked everyone on their ass when it was revealed that Kevin Spacey was John Doe. When he walks into that police precinct with his bloody fingertips and he just screams, "Detective!" What a shocking moment right there.
And this film is dark. It's dirty. We don't know what city it's in. Fincher does this on purpose. We never really get a perspective of the population. You know, there's this serial killer on a spree. Very seldom do you have an actual serial killer on a killing spree like this fast.
Yeah.
Usually serial killers operate throughout long
years.
periods of time. You know, some of them maybe take years off. They kill every couple of months, which is pretty fast for a serial killer, but they never do it as quickly as John Doe does in this film. But that's because John Doe is on a mission. He's highly motivated. And in this world, like I said, we don't know what city it's in. We don't know how the hysteria of the public. We never see like news broadcasts. We never see billboards or posters, because obviously if this was happening, it would be everywhere. Everyone would be talking about it. There'd be crowds, protests trying to catch this killer, but we never see that. We're only with these few characters, really. And Fincher decided to always make it rain in this movie for two reasons: to create this constant sense of dread, and that they would never have to worry about bad weather for when they're shooting.
Yeah, and the city is its own character in this movie, and ironically, we don't even know what city it is. And Fincher filmed in various cities. There are shots in LA, there are shots in Chicago, there are shots in New York. And so he blended all these cities together to create this fictional one. And it's a dark and grim society, and the world of the city suits Somerset's mindset on humanity. After decades of working in this city and seeing the worst humanity has to offer, it's brought him down to the cynical, nihilistic way of thinking about the world, where he could have once been idealistic like Mills is. Could have been a young, up-and-coming officer who wanted to make the world a better place, but now he's reached this point in his career where he's so nihilistic. He thinks that the world is just evil and there's nothing anyone can do to change it. And that's why he's quitting the force. He just wants to get away from the world.
And this world is so dark and unforgiving. And these characters counter the terror that's happening. You know, the relationships between Mills and Somerset. We have Tracy, who might be the most human character in the film, because she's really the only person that's full of innocence, full of life, literally and figuratively, which eventually gets drained from her more quickly than it did, obviously, from Somerset's character. And Mills and Somerset, it's a highly entertaining combination of characters, because you can relate to both of them. You can relate to the energetic youthness of Mills and the arrogance that he shows and how he feeds off his energy. And you can also relate to the soft-spoken, wise nature of Somerset, who's seen everything that Mills is going through already 100 times.
Yeah, and Mills, what he wants to do more than anything is just to prove himself, because he's given this position and he's new as a detective in this city. And the first thing Somerset does is demote him to handling the duty of interviewing neighbors within the crime scene, which Mills takes as a slight. He's like, you've read my report. You know what I've done. I mean, I don't do this kind of thing anymore. And Somerset knows that, yes, Mills is motivated, but he doesn't understand how evil and cruel the world can be. And so I think Somerset is aware of the fact that Mills is at risk of being corrupted, and he's vulnerable to the cruelty that this film ends up taking upon him.
Yeah, I think he's trying to get him to slow down, because he says a line like, it's quite a sight to watch a man feeding off his emotions.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. And they're both facing something that they don't understand, they've never seen before. And Mills even says to him, honestly, have you ever seen anything like this? Because they're dealing with an impossible situation of this horrific criminal out there killing people in this biblical way that's somehow connected religiously to sin and death. And it's,
if you think about it, John Doe in a way has a similar mindset and perspective on the world as Somerset, but Somerset is just wants to give up, and he's lost. He thinks life has lost its meaning. Whereas John Doe, he kind of views the world in a similar way, but he wants to punish the world for how evil and bad it's become. And so I think Somerset has a lot in common with John Doe, except Somerset would never harm anyone, whereas John Doe, he sees the world as it is as well, and he wants to punish people for it.
Yeah, he's a really fascinating character, and let's just talk about him for a little bit because obviously he was uncredited and unknown to be who he was, and it was eventually Kevin Spacey, which was a shocking moment. And John Doe, the speed in which he works, I think is what makes him so fascinating. He's clearly very intelligent. He's well-planned. Very seldom, like I said, do we see serial killers go on rampages like this.
And I wouldn't call it a rampage. It's something that he's been planning for a long time. For example, that the guy he has locked in that apartment has been there for a year. So he's very slow and methodical, but it's just all climaxing in this week.
Yeah, so it's very well planned. So I guess it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
And John Doe, when we finally find out who he is, before we find out who he is, when they show up at his door and after the chase scene.
And just the name, first of all, the name John Doe is so ironic.
Yeah, and so they kick in his door, and when we get to see John Doe's apartment, we really get to look inside his head and look inside of his soul, because whenever I see this movie and I see his apartment, like, that's how his brain works. And this guy, John Doe, clearly lives an extreme life of asceticism, and he's so intense in this discipline that he refuses any pleasures of the world in his life. He has nothing, and he gives himself nothing to enjoy. Usually this kind of thing is done religiously, like monks. We talked this in back-to-back episodes, in back-to-back movies now we talk about monks. But in a sense, John Doe is like a monk of death instead. And it's disturbing to see his motivation and how twisted his mind is. And his mind has been shaped by this world that he finds mundane, futile, and full of sin. And he hates it so much. And the irony of John Doe is he's punishing people's sin, with the greatest sin of all, in murder. It's very Old Testament, the whole fear of God, fearing the wrath of the Almighty, where John Doe maybe sees himself as an agent for God.
John Doe's apartment is such a powerful moment in the film, because I think what makes that so disturbing, aside from the actual, how you described the apartment, but the fact that this apartment is located in an apartment complex where hundreds of people live around this guy. It's just this horrifying idea that, you don't really know the person who's living next door to you. And this guy is literally sharing walls with probably like an innocent family. And I think it's just an incredibly terrifying thing to even think of. That you're sharing space with a horrible, murderous psychopath like this.
And the fact that a human being goes in there every day and every night and sleeps in there and spends his time in there. And you can tell by, like the hundreds of or thousands of notebooks. I think Somerset says by his calculations, there's 2,000 uncalculated, unordered, in random filing. Mm-hmm. Every single thought in his head, he pours out into these books. And he clearly wants to be studied. This is how he sees his mind. The killer's entire life is poured out onto these pages.
And the irony with John Doe, though, and Mills actually points this out in that police cruiser ride when they're driving to the desert, is John Doe believes that he was given this purpose by God, and he was told to do this by God. But then Mills points out, if you were given this assignment and this duty by God, then why do you get so much enjoyment out of it? John Doe says there's nothing wrong with enjoying the work you do. But that's a defense, because Mills actually got to the point that if you were like, why would God give you this assignment if it's something you love doing? So Mills is just saying, God doesn't care about you. God didn't give you this assignment. You're just doing this because you're a sadistic psychopath and you just want to hurt people, and you're giving yourself, you're coming up with a reason for doing it. So I think it's a great moment where Mills digs right in, he sees right through John Doe in a moment.
Yeah, and this religious undertone gives him the motivation, though, to enact these acts of murder based off the 7 deadly sins. And one of the most disturbing images, I think, in John Doe's apartment is the neon cross above his bedroom.
Oh, yeah.
Above his bed, which it looks more like a prison cell than anything. And like I said, I think he assumes or believes he's some sort of agent of God.
What do you think? Should we get one right here?
Yeah, I'll put one right there. And his apartment is adorned with Christian imagery and artifacts and little statues and framed photos. And And it's just like one of the most horrifying environments you could imagine someone to live in.
And ironically, one of the best moments of the movie is when they enter that apartment and Mills finds the photographs of himself that John Doe took in that stairwell when they were investigating one of the murder scenes. And so it shows that John Doe has always had this entire thing planned out, and he's always been one step ahead of the police, and they're just pretty much following his lead, and they don't even know it.
And that photo that John took of them on the stairwell perfectly shows and demonstrates the relationship between Somerset and Mills. In the photo, Mills is in front, he's screaming, he's yelling, he's just full of energy and vigor, where in the background, Somerset is calm, he's kind of just observing the situation and relaxed, watching his partner just go off and be ridiculous.
You're right, and maybe if Mills had been more restrained, they could have been like, "What? How do you know about this location? There's no way you should really know about this situation."
Yeah, and they maybe even could have ID'd him or figured out, or like maybe just counted him as a suspect somehow.
Yeah, that's a great point. You're right.
Thanks, man. The film's brooding, dark look was achieved through a chemical process called bleach bypass. The silver in the film stock was not removed, which deepened the dark and shadowy images in the film. And as you see in Fincher's, I think mostly in his early career, he was really into contrast and dark shadows and low lighting, like you said earlier, natural lighting, and it's very effective in this film.
He still is very much into that, but he just has more control with it with digital filmmaking, where he can precisely control what part of an image is blacked out or covered in shadow. Whereas back then, one of the reasons why he switched to digital was because he would have conversations with the cinematographers, and the cinematographers would be like, "Okay, this is what it's going to look like. It's going to be great. Trust me." And then Fincher would see the dailies the next day and be like, "What the hell? That's not at all what we talked about." And so, yeah, there's a lot of darkness in his movies, but I think it still wasn't quite what he wanted fully, aesthetically. And so going to digital allowed him to really balance out how exactly he wanted to portray the shadows and darkness in his images. And it's not just the shadows, but nowadays his movies with the digital filmmaking and cinematography, he's able to make the entire image dark without overexposing or anything or using a lot of lights. You can, like, he'll have a scene take place in a room with one small light lighting the entire scene. And so he's able to make the entire image dark where it's not shadows and it's not black, but it's just very dim, which is what we're used to. This is like being living in the world. Like oftentimes at nighttime, our rooms will have one or two lights, and it is pretty dim for the most part in our rooms.
And we all know how this movie ends. We have that intense climax with the box. What's in the box?
What's in the box?
Where all along, well, now John Doe's final plan, whether it was changed or not, he turns Mills into his final deadly sin, which is wrath. And John Doe himself commits the sin of envy by envying Mills' perfect life and taking his wife's head, putting it in a box, which sets Mills off on a path of revenge to shoot John Doe dead. And this is a very emotional scene. It's one of the most intense I've probably ever seen in my entire life. And it's iconic, the "what's in the box?" Everyone quotes that. So it's very memorable, and it's incredibly disturbing too, even though you never see the head in the box.
Yeah, again, Fincher doesn't actually show the head. He doesn't actually show the killings. And this is such a famous ending to the film, but ironically, the studio didn't want this. They had several different alternate endings that they were trying to talk the filmmakers into making, like an ending where Somerset kills John Doe before Mills can, an ending where Mills' dog's head is actually in the box. And so the filmmakers and Brad Pitt especially had to really fight to keep this ending in the film. I think this ending is the perfect capper for this film, and it wouldn't be the same movie without this ending.
And again, we've talked about Seven a little more in our serial killer episode, which is episode 17. Go watch that episode for a little more analysis of the film. Just some real quick fun facts. Denzel Washington was actually offered the role of Mills and turned it down. Fincher was accidentally sent a different version of the script where you were just talking about the ending. He was accidentally sent the ending with the head in the box, which is why he signed on to the role.
Maybe he wouldn't even have signed on if he got the alternate script.
I don't think he would have signed on at all, no. Brad Pitt really broke his arm filming this movie, which is why originally in the script, Mills isn't supposed to have a cast, but he broke his arm filming that chase scene with the actual, like a horrible gash, I think when he went through the windshield or the window of the car. So there are a lot of shots in the film where Brad Pitt actually has a cast on, but he sort of has to hide it behind his character or off frame somehow, because most films obviously are not shot in chronological order, so they had to hide his cast.
In that fantastic scene where Somerset is driving Mills and John Doe to the desert, they actually had to do reshoots, and they completely reshot Brad Pitt's side of the scene well after production, and it was just him by himself with like stand-ins on the opposite side of the camera. So and all the shots with Brad Pitt in that scene, Morgan Freeman and Kevin Spacey weren't actually there on set.
And the last words we hear in this film are, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." Somerset says, "I agree with the second part." Very deep, intense, dark film. It's very well made. If you want more analysis, again, go check out episode 17, which was our serial killer episode.
We go real in depth in that, but we got so much more to talk about. We can't spend 45 minutes on this movie.
Yeah, so we got to move on to 1997, where David Fincher directed The Game. This film was written by John Brocato and Michael Ferris. It stars Michael Douglas, Deborah Unger, Sean Penn, and James Rebhorn. This film had a worldwide box office of $109 million on a budget of $70 million. A rich man who has everything receives an unusual birthday gift from his wayward brother Conrad. Nicholas Van Orden is then forced into a live-action game that takes over his life and consumes him with terror.
This is, I think, one of my favorite Michael Douglas roles, and it's an underrated Fincher movie. I don't think that many people have even seen it, but it's a fantastic Hitchcockian kind of thriller where you're trying to figure out what's going on, what's real, what's not real, and how your character is going to get through this situation. And it's a thrilling movie, and it keeps you guessing and on the edge of your seat the entire time.
Yeah, it's a classic, like, whodunit, but, like, Fincher just has these crazy twists, and the script is fantastic, and he makes you think you know what's going to happen, but you really don't, and when you think it's the final twist, it's not even close to the final twist, and then he gets you again, and it's a really fun movie. And yeah, Michael Douglas is great. He seems to be perfect as like these wealthy, articulate, affluent men, like Gordon Gekko in Wall Street. But in this movie, throughout the film, his character is this very wealthy man who seems to have everything in the world that a person could want because of his wealth and because of his economic status and power, but really, despite having all the money he would ever need in life, he's a very empty man. He's hollow. He's rich in wealth, but poor in everything else. You know, he has a estranged relationship with his wife and his ex-wife. He barely has a relationship with his brother, Sean Penn, who you can tell wants to have a relationship with him. And he's eventually reduced to basically the exact opposite. And he's turned into, towards the end of the film, like this stumbling, desperate man looking for anything or looking for hope.
Yeah, in this character, Nicholas, he's a lonely character. He's a lonely man. And on the surface, like you said, he looks like he has everything, but ultimately, on his birthday, he spends it alone drinking champagne by himself in his house.
He has just this one cupcake for himself with a candle in it that his maid prepared.
Yeah, the person he is closest to is his maid and his house servant. And he has a phone call. The only person who calls him on his birthday is his estranged wife. You know what I mean? And the theme of this movie is a theme that anyone can relate to. You don't have to be a wealthy businessman to relate to, but the main theme of this movie is to be grateful for what you have because it's already enough, and to not lose sight of the things that are really important in life. And that's the whole point of this film, and this is what gets him mixed up in the game thanks to Conrad. And now Conrad, for his birthday, gives Nicholas this voucher, and he doesn't have to do it, but he has the option. You can do it if you want. Go to this company, CRS, give them the voucher, and they'll test you to see if you can be accepted into the game. And Conrad says he did the game, and it like saved his life and changed him forever. And he's trying to do the same thing for Nicholas, so it seems.
Yeah, and that scene's really telling where they're at lunch, and kind of Conrad just comes up and sneaks up on him, and I like the way that Fincher filmed it, where he gets these like really beautiful close-ups of Sean Penn, and he kind of just like blends with the background. And when he gets shots of Nicholas, they're just wide, not close-ups at all, and he seems kind of lost in the background of the restaurant.
Makes him
everything
seem
going
empty.
on. Yeah. So clearly, Conrad wants a relationship with his brother, and you can tell he's like worried about him. You can tell he's like trying to connect with them, and by giving him this card. And Nicholas just is completely like, yeah, standoffish with it, and like, yeah, whatever, I'll look at it later. I don't really care what this is.
One of the most defining character traits of Nicholas is that he witnessed his father jump off their house when he was a child. And so that's a defining moment in his life, that his brother is possibly afraid of him committing a similar act.
Exactly, because Nicholas's life, similar to the game, which we'll eventually learn a little bit, spoilers, we won't talk about it too much yet, is his life is kind of a facade. You know, this big house, this job, all his money, it's kind of like a shield that he uses to prevent letting himself out and communicating and connecting with people. And, you know, the entire film, before he starts getting into the game, Nicholas doesn't initiate communication with anybody. He will just talk by him. He won't talk to anybody unless they talk to him, unless they call him.
You're right.
He won't communicate with his maid unless she talks to him, or anyone at work unless they talk to him, because he'd rather be alone. He's a very depressed man.
And he's also ruthless business-wise, where he's threatening this writer to sign this new publishing deal that won't really work out in the writer's favor, but it will work out in the company's favor. And he's kind of lost his humanity in a lot of ways. And that's especially what his brother is worried about, this lack of connection that Nicholas has with the world and with the people in his life and his relationships. It's become very estranged, and Conrad's worried about that.
Yeah, Fincher effectively makes you connect with this dislikable character, who you would think on the surface the audience can't connect with. And I think that's one of the main critiques of this film is Nicholas isn't a likable person. You can't relate to him too much. But when you look past the surface, like in a lot of Fincher movies, when you see the real themes and the underlying tones, Fincher's trying to make us connect with his loneliness, and
I think
how he needs to change his life to find happiness.
Yeah, and I think adding in the storyline of witnessing his father's death it's the thing that makes us relate to him the most, because now we can it makes us understand how this person became this way, because they become emotionless because of the traumatic past of their childhood.
Yeah, and when the game starts, it's so fun. This movie is really like on the edge of your seat the entire time, and somehow the game is sort of connected to his father's death, because it starts when he finds that clown, that doll that's in the same spot where his father died.
In the same exact position too, the body.
Yeah, and so the game starts and things in his life start to fall apart. You know, his pen leaks, his briefcase won't open with his key, wine is spilled on him, he's trapped in an elevator, there's just chaos all around him. He finds himself being blackmailed, his bank accounts are emptied, he's wandering around in Mexico like a homeless man, and he's trapped inside a cab sinking in a bay, he's left for dead, and it's just a lot of fun to try to figure out what's going on with him. Is the game real? Is it not? Is it this secret organization, or is it not? It seems to be really well funded because they have the resources to fill up an entire hospital full of actors, and on the flick of a switch, it all shuts down and everyone runs away.
Yeah, and they even employ the TV news anchor on television, and the news anchor starts talking with Nicholas, and they have a conversation. And so it seems as though CRS, the company, has so much power at their disposal where they can manipulate everything surrounding Nicholas. And it becomes this thing where Nicholas begins questioning everything, and every person he meets could be part of the game, and every interaction he has could be setting him up for something to happen. And he keeps getting these clues and these messages. And for example, he gets a handle given to him, and he doesn't know what to do with it, so he just puts it in his pocket. But then 20 minutes later, we find out the cabbie crashes their car into the river, and he pulls out the handle to lower the window so he can escape the crashed car as it sinks into the water. And so, as crazy as things seem and appear, it also seems as though CRS is planning this perfectly to the T, and everything is happening according to their plan.
But it seems to get even more out of control, where you can't help but realize or think that there's no way CRS is like planning this, and like somehow someone's trying to destroy his life, and he has no idea what he's gotten into. Like there's even scenes with a shootout while he's in an apartment with that woman. There's guns blazing, and it's intense, and he gets buried alive basically in a Mexican graveyard.
Yeah, and CRS eventually, from what we think, it becomes this company that has done all this to steal all of Nicholas's money and to dissolve him of his possessions, because he wakes up in Mexico and then everything's been stripped from him. All he has left is his gold watch. And in order to cross the border, he barters his gold watch with the officer to let him through. And so after he does this, Nicholas has finally stripped away the final material object in his life, and now he's completely barren. And so when he comes back to America, he literally has absolutely nothing. He's been completely stripped down.
And I think one of the best shots in the film is when he wakes up in that Mexican cemetery, in that graveyard, and Fincher gets this beautiful wide of this. It's this bright sunny day, and Nicholas just crawls out of this grave, and he's in this new white suit, and it's just all dirty and everything. And he looks just like all the statues and all of the gravestones in the cemetery, and it's kind of like he's just as dead as the people he's walking among at that moment, because he's such a hollow man inside.
Or could it mean that he died and now he's been resurrected?
Maybe
he's resurrected as a new man.
And now he's wearing white for purity. He's an angel now.
And then eventually he finds CRS and he finds the woman, and he holds her at gunpoint at the rooftop. And then it's this really tense moment where we think that he's finally got them, and we're about to learn everything that we've been waiting to hear and find out. And then the door's being broken into, and then it finally breaks open, and then Nicholas shoots the gun and shoots his brother Conrad right in the chest.
Through a bottle of champagne, because clearly it was a surprise, and it looks like Conrad planned the whole thing.
Yeah, so we think, oh, this was all just a joke. And then upon seeing the death of his brother, Nicholas jumps off the roof just like his father did when he was a child.
And he lands through glass onto a giant air cushion.
Yeah, with an X mark on it.
And so the whole point of the game, it was all planned by Conrad to make Nicholas feel again, to connect with humanity again, and to make him live again, because Conrad recognized that his brother was completely lost to greed and ambition, and probably has been noticing this for years, and it's been getting worse. And obviously we talked that it was Nicholas's birthday, and he was the same age that his father was when his father committed suicide. So Conrad didn't want Nicholas to end up like their father, and he created this elaborate CRS Rue game to bring him back to reality.
Exactly. And it all connects to this Bible verse that another businessman tells Nicholas early in the film when he's asking about CRS, and the businessman says this quote from the Bible, "Where once I was blind, now I see." And so Nicholas was living a blind life, and he had lost sight of the things that were really important. And then by going through the game and losing everything, every dollar he owned, every possession he had, and being stripped down, and then seeing the death of his only brother, the only person he loved in the world, he finally understood what he had been taking for granted all of his life. And now, after experiencing this, he can begin living a more humane life.
Yeah, and the ending, it's just a tremendous amount of relief, and it's hysterical too, because Sean Penn, his brother Conrad, comes out at the bottom of the building with a T-shirt that says, "I was drugged and left for dead in Mexico, and all I got was this stupid T-shirt."
Yeah.
And it's hysterical, and it's so fun, and it's such a good ending, and it really makes you feel good, because finally Nicholas can live again, and he feels again, and he feels emotion again, and it ends with him getting coffee with the woman who's part of the game and was off to her next assignment.
Yeah, she says she's like going to Australia for the next game, and it's just like, it's a fascinating idea that this company does this kind of thing just as a, I don't know, as a tool for helping save lives in a way. You know what I mean? And obviously, I wonder how much do you think the service costs for the game?
Probably like $1 million.
It's got to be more
pretty
than that.
elaborate.
There's a lot of people employed in this.
It's pretty
Lots
elaborate.
of sets.
Yeah.
They cause a lot of destruction. It's got to be like 20 million.
They got fake guns and bullets
Yeah.
and everything. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty elaborate. But it's kind of fun. It's kind of like they make their own little movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they put Nicholas in that movie, but it's happening in real time.
Yeah, and this is a really good movie, and it kind of is relatively unknown in Fincher's filmography for a lot of people who are fans of his, and they might have never even heard of it, but it's very entertaining, thriller full of so many fun plot twists around every corner.
It never stops. There's never a dull moment in this movie.
Yeah, but when you have great filmmakers who have dense filmographies, some movies just kind of fall under the shadow of the other films that are critically acclaimed. And this one, it's very good. It's a good time.
Yeah, I also, if you haven't seen this, I recommend checking it out. It's a great film. Next up, we have Fight Club, released October 15th, 1999, written by Chuck Palahniuk, starring Brad Pitt, Edward Norton, Helena Bonham Carter, Meatloaf, Zach Grenier, and Jared Leto. This film had a paltry box office of $100 million worldwide on a budget of $63 million. A depressed insomniac meets an impulsive soap maker named Tyler Durden. To escape their mundane lives, together they form an underground fight club that flourishes into something beyond a group of like-minded members.
We're about to break the first and second rules of Fight Club and talk about Fight Club.
We're awful members.
This is a movie that for me has been constantly shifting in and out of like my top 10 personal favorite movies all time since I was like 11 the first time I saw this movie. I think it's one of the most important films possibly around the turn of the century. 1999 was an incredible year for movies, and this is one of the best that year.
For 1999, I actually made a list of the great movies that came out that year.
Can we hear the list? Yeah.
Ready for this?
1999 films.
Okay. Fight Club, The Matrix, The Sixth Sense, The Talented Mr. Ripley, The Mummy, Austin Powers, American Beauty, The Iron Giant, Magnolia, The Green Mile, The Insider, Big Daddy, Being John Malkovich, 10 Things I Hate About You, Eyes Wide Shut, Toy Story 2, Girl Interrupted, Office Space, Sleepy Hollow, American Pie, and Star Wars The Phantom Menace. What a year for movies.
Absolutely insane, dude.
It's crazy.
Absolutely insane.
Easily the best year that decade. Could be the best year for 20 years.
Maybe the best year ever for film. And again, one of the most important films in turn of the century in terms of innovation, creativity, and style. And it showed that people really wanted this like gritty, dark, challenging story in a realistic fashion, but also the fact that the entire film is basically a commentary in ways on our consumerist society that we live in, that we're obsessed with and that we'll never leave probably.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I think this movie kind of has a way of speaking to men in masculinity sense, where there are lots of films and books that come out regarding women and the things they go through in life, and like something like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, where these women get together and share their experiences throughout life. And I don't think there have been that many movies about this kind of thing for men. An example is Dead Poet Society. And I think Fight Club embraced that idea of discussing what it's like to be a man in the modern world, and especially in a Western civilized country like America, and what that's done to masculinity, how masculinity is used in different ways, and how it's repressed in many ways. And I think that this film spoke to an entire generation of men who were kind of confused about their place in the world.
Yeah, the film is full of macho masculinity, violence, and destruction. Of course, you can't blame people for looking at this film on the surface and seeing those themes and thinking that those are the main motives of the film and they see those as weaknesses for the film. But Fincher, he crafted Fight Club so expertly that despite all these, whether you want to call them toxic masculinity and themes of violence and all that, if you want to call that weaknesses, you can't help but appreciate the filmmaking at the same time. It's really well made. It's stylish. It's colorful. It's well paced. It's violent. It's relatable, and the entire film, kind of like you were talking about earlier for it seemed to connect and resonate with so many young men. It's sort of like a coping mechanism for a lot of depressed and lost men out there in Western civilization, which really kind of what Fight Club is all about in general, not the movie, but like the Fight Club in Fight Club. That's what it is.
Yeah, and I think what's happened is it's a commentary on the fact that in modern society, it's not really suited to the basic instinctual aspects of masculinity, and I think men in modern societies lost the understanding of how to use masculinity to their advantage, and that's why in this film they resort to the worst parts of masculinity: aggression, violence, destruction. Like those aren't the only aspects of masculinity. There's a lot of good, beneficial aspects to masculinity, and I think that, and also it's depicted in the fact that men aren't sure of their masculinity and how to use it, and they've kind of lost it in a way, and that's characterized in the testicular cancer group, where these men have literally lost their testicles and they've lost the biological connection they have to being a men and masculinity itself. So their masculinity is taken away from them. For example, Meatloaf's character, through the hormone therapy, he's developing characteristics that are more female than male, especially with his breasts that he's developing from the hormone therapy. So a lot of the film is a commentary on men losing their masculinity and not understanding how to get it back or how to use it in a positive way. And also it alludes to the idea when Tyler Durden says we're a generation of men raised by women. So we don't know good examples of masculinity to use for ourselves.
In the main characters in this film, Tyler Durden and the narrator, we never know his name, it's just narrator. They have no father figures in their life, and they're sort of looking for a father figure, and they end up kind of creating Fight Club as a sense of camaraderie to build father figures for all these lost men.
I think it's more so, for that, but also the narrator, I think that he looks to Tyler as a sort of father figure for himself.
Yeah, I can see that too.
Because there's this really interesting thing Chuck Palahniuk describes about his book, where there's this phenomenon where for young men, when boys become men, obviously if they're lucky enough to have a dad, that's their initial father figure. But then when they grow into adulthood and leave the home, they look for a second father figure. And it could be like the master of a craft that they apprentice for, or a teacher or a professor or an artist, or any kind of male figure that they can look up to in another way as a father figure. And so I think Edward Norton's character, the narrator, is looking for that father figure, the second father figure in his life. And then through Tyler Durden, he sees not so much someone who is of like high moral caliber or sets good examples, but it's more of a desirous quality where I want to be like that, and that's why I'm gravitating towards him, because he is how I want to be.
Exactly. I think it's a mistake to look at this film on the surface and see the destruction, the mayhem, the anarchy, and not realize the subliminal messages and underlying tones, which are actually, it's about identity, it's about balance, it's about life, it's about discovering your path and knowing what you want and having the courage to take risks and aspire to be something, which basically all these characters have these immense transformations. Even Tyler Durden makes immense transformations, where Project Mayhem, it starts as Fight Club, and you think it's all about this destruction, anarchy, but he has a master plan, which we'll get into in a little bit.
I think you're absolutely right. It's a great point you made, where I think a lot of people look at this film with a common misconception about, I think they see this film as promoting anarchism and rebellion and nihilism, but in destruction, and they see this movie as like rebelling against capitalism, rebelling against Western civilization, and trying to cause destruction. But what happens is that ends up being the wrong way to carry out how you feel, and that's evident when the narrator eventually overcomes this and changes in the last act of the movie, where he tries to stop what's been put into motion, because he realizes that chaos and anarchy, it might seem sexy and cool when you're young.
And nihilism,
it's good, sounds great, and it's fun to embrace when you're young. But when you mature and you become an adult, you realize that anarchy and nihilism and chaos has no place in the world, and we need order in civilization in order to thrive as human beings and to live peaceful lives and to be able to withstand one another. And so I think that's the common misconception a lot of people have with this movie and what it's really trying to say.
This movie is iconic and it's one of the most talked about films in the last 2 decades, and probably still will be for years to come. And Brad Pitt, obviously, as Tyler Durden, is incredibly memorable and iconic. And I mean, you got Tyler Durden on your desk right there, your
Right
little
there.
Funko right there. People love Brad. It's a very flashy, sexy role for him. He's absolutely shredded for no reason. And it's one of the best he's ever done. And he's so charismatic on camera. He's perfect as Tyler Durden. But he was already a star. You know, Brad Pitt was a big name. Edward Norton was a very good actor, but this really put him on a different level and made him almost equal with Brad Pitt in terms of like A-list status and national or international star.
Yeah, Edward Norton had gotten an Oscar nomination for his first film, and so he had become well known in the industry, but still worldwide and across the country, he wasn't a household name until this movie came out.
Yeah. And you're meant to identify not with Tyler Durden. You're meant to identify with the narrator in this film. You know, the narrator is the surrogate for us. He's trapped in this world that he hates. He's shackled to this consumer society. On the surface, he tries to look successful and like he has his life together with his IKEA apartment, which he subscribes to. But he really is a shell of a man. He's a shell of a human. He's hollow on the inside. He tries to fill his life with consumer goods, but he's just like his fridge. You know, he has a fridge full of condiments and no food. How embarrassing.
There's nothing substantial about him, just like how there's nothing substantial in his fridge.
He's truly empty, soulless, and like many people, he hopes that these material items will complete him and will fill his life with meaning.
But I think that's the wrong way to look about it for him, because he goes on that speech about how we're all copies of copies of copies. Like, we're all the same. We're all doing the same bullshit, living out the same lives until we die. And I think that it's a contrast to he's buying all this stuff that he doesn't need as a way to make himself feel better about his life so he doesn't have to deal with his life. But the stuff he's buying are literally copies of copies. Because, like, if you want to buy potato chips, walk into the store, there's 20 different brands of potato chips, different kinds. And it's like there's really no big difference between them. They all pretty much taste the same. The differences are just the branding and the bag. Same thing with a chair. You can buy a chair which looks like 1,000 other chairs, or a couch. So he thinks he's upgrading his life and making himself more unique by buying all this stuff. But ultimately, he's just buying more copies of other copies to add to his life, which is a copy of a copy. So he's in this cycle of perpetuating this numbness within society where you've lost any connection to like spirituality, connection to nature, connection to other people or in the world, and meaning in your life. And you've just been overtaken by consumerism, by creating a facade of representation of yourself and losing the humanity within inside of you.
And he suffers from intense insomnia, and he can only sleep by feeding off the emotions and pain of other people at these learning to cope meetings he goes to. And doing this, he's borrowing their pain, he's borrowing their trauma. This lets him sleep. It's the only way that he can get to bed at night. Otherwise, he's up all night watching TV and just trying to fall asleep.
Yeah, I think that when he goes to these meetings and the reason why he's able to sleep is because he's able to cry at these meetings, and he's able to not just borrow their pain, but also it gives him an outlet to really express the pain he has inside. He's not dying from cancer, but he has a cancerous problem within him. And these groups allow him to let that out and emote. And since he's actually feeling and emoting and experiencing for the first time in these meetings, that's why he's finally able to fall asleep, because he's finally living.
Until Marla shows up. And Marla comes to these meetings too and basically ruins his ability to cry and feel and emote, because he can't do it if there's another person there that's not suffering from these illnesses. And she even goes to the testicular cancer one too, which he thinks is ridiculous. And Marla, she's a different form of lost than the narrator. She mostly goes to the meetings probably out of boredom. She says it's cheaper than a movie and the coffee's free. And Marla's kind of a underlying key to this entire film. And she's in a way a different solution to the narrator's problems if he follows this path with Marla rather than what he does with Fight Club and Project Mayhem.
I think that Marla also goes to the meetings because when the narrator is explaining to her why he goes, she interrupts him and says, because they actually listen to you. And so I think they're both going to these meetings because it's the only instance in their lives where they're actually able to connect with other people on a personal and emotional and intimate level, whereas the rest of their lives are just filled with numbness and disconnect.
Yeah. I think Marla wants a deep connection, like, wants a relationship. She's wearing that wedding dress, the bride's dress for who knows what reason that she found for like $4.
And also the narrator has that dream about her in the Arctic cave with the penguin and Marla sitting there. So she's begun infecting his mind, and he's attracted and desirous of her, and he doesn't want to admit it.
And now there's a specific point in the narrator's life and story where Tyler Durden enters his life. And this is on the plane because the narrator is a traveling analyst and works for this insurance company for car companies. And he meets Tyler Durden on a flight. And for me, this is probably because now his mind's kind of mentally checked out, and he needs to try to figure out a way to cope with everything and cope with his depression and cope with his insomnia. And we talked about earlier that his desire for a father figure. And of course, we all know the twist ending of Fight Club, so we might as well just get it out of the way now.
Yeah, we can't really properly talk about the movie anyways.
Yeah, so Tyler is the narrator, and the narrator is Tyler. And the narrator created Tyler to cope with his life and try to find meaning in life and try to Tyler, I think he says, is everything that he wants to be, looks like he wants to look, fucks like he wants to fuck, acts like he wants to act.
Yeah, and so the narrator, he is so numb, and he has failed to act throughout his life. He's never truly lived, and he's held down by this kind of, I guess you could say it's a fear of ever doing anything, and he's just a cog in the system. He's become just like another mindless cog in the machine.
Whereas Tyler's free. Yeah. Tyler doesn't have a job. Well, he has part-time jobs, but his job doesn't control him.
And so Tyler is a manifestation of all the things that the narrator desires and wishes he could be.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, Tyler's evolution is probably just as drastic as the narrator's throughout the film. And Tyler at first seems very nihilistic, and he tells people and his followers, you're all worthless scum. You're the same organic dying matter as everything else. But his plans evolve and his philosophies evolve. And basically what he wants to do is Fight Club, then which turns into Project Mayhem. He wants to free people. He wants to pull them out of their trapped lives, and they're trapped to corporations and money and debt and jobs. And he wants to free people. He wants to hit the reset button on the world. He wants to liberate the population.
That's true. I also think that those are the intentions, but also the irony with Tyler and Project Mayhem is that he ends up creating this society and this group, which becomes like an organized cult, where at first Fight Club was about... So first of all, let's talk about Fight Club works because when the men enter this fight, they experience pain, and they also experience the risk of death when they fight. And the reason why they become addicted to Fight Club is because these feelings are things that make them feel alive for the first time in a long time, because they're like the narrator, they become numb. And so fighting gives them, makes them feel like they're living again. And so that's why they gravitate towards Fight Club. And so I think initially the idea of Fight Club was about setting people free and showing them how to feel again. But then Tyler changes his theory and the way about it, where he creates Project Mayhem, which becomes an anarchist group. And then the members of Project Mayhem end up being mindless copies of copies, where they all wear all black, they shave their heads, they stop thinking for themselves, they follow his orders without question. So they tried to, by escaping the mindless, numbing copies of copies in the world and being just another ant on the hill, they ironically became more copies on copies within Project Mayhem.
So they fought conformity with more conformity.
Exactly.
And they also even get corporate sponsorship, which is pretty funny too and ironic.
Yeah, so I think Tyler started out with wanting to free men, and then it ended up being more of like a fascist movement.
And just to keep going on Fight Club and what it really is and means is, I also think that the whole point of the fighting is in order to evolve and change, you have to, in their sense and in their perspective, is destroy what you once were. And you have to tear that part of you, what you were before, apart. You have to break down what you once were in order to like rise up from the ashes and become a new person and have a new path. And I think this is really symbolized with the chemical burn, which is one of the most important moments in the film, because it's one of the most important moments for the narrator, because in order to make his new life, he must strip away his old one. And the chemical burn, it'll always be a reminder that his life is happening at that moment. His life isn't happening in his past. It's not happening with what he's going to have. And it's the first step that Tyler says to enlightenment, is to realize who you are, accept who you are, and that's the only way to grow.
I also think that the soap scene is used as a way to eliminate your fear of death, because Tyler says in that moment, you have to accept one day you are going to die. And so I think that in order to properly live, you have to eliminate your fear of dying, because it's going to happen. It comes for us all, and it's inevitable. And if you obsess over death, you're never going to fully learn how to live. And so I think Tyler's trying to teach the narrator to just let go of the fear of death.
Yeah, and the whole concept of Tyler selling soap, like that's his profession. Like, what does that mean? What does that symbolize? And you can look at it as the cleansing of somebody, or the cleansing of life, and getting rid of your past to move on. And the fat that they use symbolizes excess, obviously, and they get it from rich people. He's selling their fat, rich asses back to themselves. So it's kind of like this cycle that he's creating. And again, that's, I think, the point of the soap and why they make and sell soap.
And I also think that, so we talked about the reason why the narrator created Tyler was as a way to experience all the things that he wishes he could do and be and act as. And I think the main catalyst for him creating Tyler is meeting Marla. So I think Marla is the reason why the narrator creates Tyler Durden, because since he becomes attracted and desires Marla intimately and sexually, and he is incapable of actually opening up and living and experiencing things in his life as a narrator, he creates Tyler as a way to have sexual, intimate, and emotional connection with Marla. So I think that's the main reason and catalyst for him creating Tyler.
And I think also maybe because Marla prevented him from sleeping. Maybe that's also why too.
I think it's because they make that deal about switching things, so then after they make that deal, it's okay. But the fact that she's showing up in his dream fantasy meditation is showing that he wants her, and so he creates Tyler. Because Tyler, the flashes of Tyler, none of that starts until after he meets Marla. So she's, I think, the driving catalyst for the creation of Tyler Durden.
Although you can catch glimpses of Tyler, because Fincher puts little quick frames of him throughout the first act of the film before he starts coming into picture, which obviously you probably wouldn't really notice it the first couple of times you watch this movie, but you can look them up and find the frames where Fincher put Tyler Durden in frame before he's even comes into existence in the movie.
Yeah. And also this movie deals with the idea that falling victim to untapped potential, because Tyler is a representation of the narrator's potential as a person. Because if the narrator can create this fake person who has the potential to be all the things that the narrator wants to be, then deep down the narrator has the ability to do all those things and be that person. And so I think Tyler Durden is a metaphor for the untapped potential within yourself that you never set free.
And that is perfectly shown in the scene where they're at the convenience store and he holds the clerk at gunpoint and he asks him, what do you want to be with his life? What do you want to do? Did you want to work at this convenience store? And then the convenience store clerk confesses that he wanted to be a veterinarian. And so Tyler steals his license and sells him. If in 6 weeks he's not on his way to become a veterinarian, he's going to kill him. And this scene is really important because of what you just said in terms of the potential and ambition of people who squander that and ignore that, what they can become if they get motivated and get on the right path, which we talked about in the beginning of this segment, how this film is also about finding your path in life if you look underneath all the surface of it. And that he says the next day, that will be the best day of that person's life. his breakfast will taste better than any breakfast we'd ever have, because now he's on this forced path of potential and ambition, and now he's going to change his life because of Tyler Durden.
Exactly. So it's actually a really cool theme right there. And then also, obviously, one of the most known themes about this movie is the attack on capitalism and consumerism. One of the best way that David Fincher pokes fun at capitalism is by inserting a Starbucks cup into nearly every single scene of this film. And if you look closer, you can see a cup of Starbucks in almost every shot.
So the relationship between Tyler and the narrator becomes strained when Tyler basically leaves the narrator out of specific operations in Project Mayhem, keeps him in the dark, and kind of just starts disappearing at times. And
yeah, the narrator starts like discovering what's happening.
And he becomes jealous of other characters in the film in part of Project Mayhem because he doesn't know yet who Tyler Durden really is.
And in terms of jealousy, that's the main reason for why he so viciously assaults Jared Leto's character and beats him to a pulp, because they purposely made Jared Leto have similar hair to Brad Pitt in this film, I think to make him look kind of like Tyler Durden. And also Tyler gives him a little bit of attention, which makes the narrator jealous. But ultimately, if you think about it, it's the narrator who's giving Jared Leto attention because Jared Leto looks like Tyler Durden, which is why I think the narrator is giving him attention. So he's mad at himself for giving him attention, which leads to him beating him to an absolute pulp in their fight.
Yeah, and if you actually look at different parts of the film like that, you can see where, Edward, the narrator, is Tyler Durden, and he kind of acts very selfishly because he's the leader of this group. And, in these fights, they say it's very specific. There's just one man, two men to a fight, and they try to keep everything fair and balanced, but he takes advantage of Jared Leto's character and beats him to a pulp excessively. He also breaks the rules when he lets Bob into Project Mayhem, even though he doesn't really fit the qualifications of it. So he kind of ends up, he doesn't realize he's doing it. He's breaking his own rules constantly throughout the film.
And I think the biggest hint that there is actually only one person is when Marla's over the house and the narrator's having breakfast in the kitchen, and then Marla comes in and they have a rude conversation, and then Tyler's in the basement telling him what to say and not to mention him, and telling narrator how to respond. And it's clearly from Marla's point of view, if you watch it for the second time, you understand that narrator is the only person in the house besides her. She's the one who had sex with her last night, and so there's no other person in the house with them. And so Tyler's telling the narrator what to say, and they're never in the room at the same time as Marla. So Marla's the only character. They'll be in the same room in the Fight Club sequences and with the Project Mayhem, but with Marla, the pair is never in the same room with her at the same time. I think it's because he has an emotional connection, an intimate connection to her.
And the narrator eventually starts to kind of figure things out where he's tracking Tyler because he's disappeared. He can't find him, and he's finding fight clubs all over the country, in every city, every major city he goes to, and no one talks to him about it, and they're all secretive, and he seems to be left out of this big master plan. And it's not until he's in the hotel where he finally realizes that Tyler Durden is him when he's on the phone with Marla. And he asks Marla if they have had sex, and he asks Marla to tell him what his name is. And she says, Tyler Durden. It's just like the planes where it's like, we've lost cabin pressure, and then everything goes slow, and then Tyler appears in the hotel room, and he's got a new look.
And obviously, this is one of the best twists in cinema history, especially the first time you watch this. If you don't know the twist, it's great. And now we can look at Tyler as the main antagonist of the film rather than one of the protagonists. And now the narrator realizes that when he realizes Tyler was his creation, he's understanding that everything that Tyler's doing is wrong, and it's excessive, and it needs to be stopped.
But this plan has gone too far, and Tyler has prepared for this, and that's why none of the members of Project Mayhem communicate really with the narrator. They don't do what he says, even though he's clearly a founder. Even when he admits that he's Tyler Durden, even to the cops, they're all like, "You told us you'd say that.
We gotta get your balls."
Yeah, we gotta get your balls. You told us to say it. We gotta say, sir, this is really sending a strong message to the Project Mayhem.
I'm a fan of your work.
And so Tyler prepared for the situation because he knew at some point the narrator was going to connect the dots and realize that they were the same person.
And then, so the narrator, when he confronts Tyler, it's him confronting himself. And so Tyler represents the fantasy version of the narrator, which is unrealistic and not true to who he can truly be. It's everything he wants to be, but that's kind of a lie. And so he has to destroy this fantasy version of himself in order to move on.
Which leads us to the end. And, well, actually, I love the fight scene between the two
fight
of them
scene's
because it's
awesome.
so fun. And obviously, the narrator is no match for Tyler Durden.
But when they cut to the security cam footage and then you just see Edward Norton's body being pulled around and beaten up, it's
By
great.
himself, and
Yeah.
he just throws himself over the stairs and everything. It's pretty
amazing.
intense, and it's very cool. And then he finally gets to the top of the building, and Tyler lets him in on the entire plan. But, you know, the power of the relationships is starting to transfer to the narrator because he's starting to understand more that he's really in control of the whole entire situation. And the only way that he can stop Tyler and to gain full control is he has to, in a way, destroy Tyler. And he does this by sticking the gun in his mouth and blowing a hole through his cheek, which for him kills Tyler Durden.
Yeah, and so he's killing that fantasy of himself, and now he's just the narrator. And I think that from this moment on, he's not going to be Tyler, but he's still going to be a free version of himself compared to what he was in the first act of the movie. He'll never go back to that person, but he's going to be a new version of himself.
And he seems like he's now going to follow the path with Marla and see what that part of his life leads to,
Yeah.
and develop that situation.
Yeah.
And at the end, does he find meaning in all the chaos? Does he find meaning in destroying all those credit card company buildings? Or does he find meaning and empathy by choosing this new life with Marla? Because he holds her hand while the buildings collapse.
Yeah, it could be he originally was seeking destruction, but now he's probably seeking a connection now.
He's learned to be free. He's overcome his fears, his loneliness, his emptiness. And this is a fantastic ending to a terrific movie, and it's iconic. We have Marla and Tyler, who we now know is really Tyler, holding hands while they watch all these skyscrapers blow up and collapse, and that song by the Pixies is playing, and it's just super memorable. We all love it, and it's awesome. It's a great movie.
And ironically, as loved and revered as this film is now, it was an absolute box office failure, and it only made $36 million on its release in America, which is a huge bomb because the budget was twice that. But as we know, this film became a cult sensation and a phenomenon. And after it was released on DVD, it sold 13 million DVDs, which paid for twice the budget. Because if you factor in a DVD costs about $20 a pop, times 13 million, that's $260 million.
Plus, every dude in college has a poster of Fight Club in their dorm room.
Yeah, so it became a cult classic, and I think obviously one of the main reasons why the film didn't do well theatrically is because of bad press, especially from Rosie O'Donnell, who used to have her own talk show. And on the day of Fight Club's release, she spoke about Fight Club on her show, and she hated the movie so much that she absolutely tore it apart, and she told all of her viewers to not watch it. And she even gave away the famous twist on her talk show on live television, saying that Tyler Durden was actually the narrator the whole time.
The day it came out.
It's one thing to not like a movie, but to ruin the twist of a movie, it's pretty unfair when you factor in all the people that worked hard to make that movie. So I think it was a pretty irresponsible thing for her to do.
That's what happens when some people get power, man. They use it horribly.
Yeah. And also the marketing of this film is actually drastically different in tone than the film itself, because when the movie was done, the producers were like, what is this movie? We don't know how to market this. And so David Fincher had a plan, but they rejected his plan of marketing. Instead, they focused on the idea that this movie stars Brad Pitt and there's fighting in it. And so most people thought this movie was about just like an underground boxing movie with Brad Pitt in it. So they had no idea what the real movie and story and theme was really about.
Yeah, how do you market a movie that the entire plot is a satire on consumerism and marketing?
I don't know. It's tough.
Moving on to Panic Room, which came out in 2002, written by David Cope. This film stars Jodie Foster, Kristen Stewart, Forrest Whitaker, Dwight Yoakam, and Jared Leto. It had a worldwide box office of $197 million, with a budget of $48 million. During a home invasion, mother and daughter seek protection in their New York home's panic room. 3 intruders brutally tear the house apart in search of something unknown to the new homeowners.
This film is excellent, and it's a engaging and engrossing thriller. It's basically about a mother who does everything she can to protect her daughter. And it's also one of my favorite movies that takes place in one location.
Yeah, it's a very exciting thriller, and it's really well made. Again, kind of like The Game, this is sort of in the shadow of a lot of Fincher's other films, like we just talked about Fight Club and like The Social Network and Zodiac and everything. And this movie, it doesn't have deep symbolic meaning. It's a simple story, pretty much just meshed into a very suspenseful thriller. In Panic Room, it's a highly unique robbery story, and it seems incredibly plausible and kind of realistic. Fincher really wants you to feel the realism in this movie and wanted to make it seem like it could happen to you. I mean, if you were wealthy and had a panic room in your Brickstone, New York apartment. But it's an amazing film, and he got very creative with the filmmaking and the camera work. He has this amazing, long take CGI shot of the entire house that starts with Meg in bed and goes downstairs through the entire house and shows the robbers getting in the house. So his camera work was very experimental, coming off Fight Club and also working in that kind of style there.
You have to be in order to create this movie because it's easy to make this movie boring.
Because, yeah, like you said, it's just one environment.
Yeah. And I think this is Kristen Stewart's first role as Sarah, Meg's daughter. And Jodie Foster is fantastic as always in this movie. She's obviously one of the best actors of all time, and she really kills it in this movie. And I think that this movie is similar to The Game, where it has like a Hitchcockian thriller-esque context to it. It's got a great cast. I mean, Jared Leto, Forrest Whitaker are awesome. And I think that it keeps you guessing. It seems very simple, but it ends up being a complex story.
Yeah, basically the plot of this film is Jodie Foster's character, Meg, is recently divorced from this wealthy guy, and they get this new, beautiful, huge apartment in New York, and this is their first night in the home. And what they don't realize is, yeah, they get shown the house by the realtor, and they get shown that panic room, but they don't realize that there's a lot of money stashed away in that house. And so these robbers set up this plan to break into this house, which is supposed to be empty. No one's supposed to be home, and just going to go into that panic room and get all the money. I think they think it's a couple million, but it ends up being like $22 million in bonds.
And so the film becomes a cat and mouse game between the robbers are trying to get into this impenetrable panic room, and then Meg and Sarah are trying to figure out ways to stop them. And they come up with really smart ways of trying to flush them out with smoke, and Meg tries to call for help using her cell phone. And there's that great scene where while the criminals are talking amongst themselves on like the second floor, and the panic room's on the third floor, Meg makes a run for her cell phone in her bedroom, and there's that great shot where she's reaching under her bed, and then she grabs the phone, but she knocks her lamp over, and then the criminals hear the lamp fall, and then Fincher, in one of his rare uses of slow motion, creates this great sequence where the criminals are chasing her, and it becomes a race to the panic room, and Jodie Foster gets there just in time. But it's one of the most thrilling sequences I've ever seen. It's just like every time I see it, my heart pounds.
The 3 robbers are named Burnham, Raoul, and Junior, and Burnham's played by Forrest Whitaker, and he seems to be a very intelligent guy, but he's also desperate, which is why he's on this job. And he worked for the security company that set up all the security for this house, and he
helps build them.
Yeah, so I think he says in the film he spent 12 years of his life building rooms to keep men like them out of them. He worked on building these panic rooms, which is why he's very smart and knows the weaknesses of them, the few of them that there are.
He also seems to be the only robber with any kind of morality within him.
Yeah, he's not there to commit violence, but there's the wild card in the group, the guy Raoul, who's masked the whole time, and he brings a gun, which they didn't agree on. And then Jared Leto's character, Junior, is kind of the guy who set up the whole plan and planned the whole thing out in terms of no one's supposed to be there. But he's also, like Raoul, them two are more out. They'll do more harm to to Meg and Sarah Where Burnham, he's just there just to get the money.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between them, though. I think that Junior is more of like a desperate criminal. Like he seems like a drug user who just wants money. He needs money. Whereas Raul really seems like a sociopathic, emotionless killer, and he ends up becoming the main villain between even the criminals. He becomes the ultimate antagonist of the movie, and he becomes a dangerous figure in the story.
And the villains actually have a plan. Like you see a bunch of home robbery movies and stuff like that where they're not that well organized, but they come prepared for all situations and they have tons of tools and everything. Specifically Burnham, and I think one of the best scenes in the entire movie is when Sarah and Meg make it inside the panic room, and Burnham's trying to figure out what their next play would be, because this is kind of like a chess match between Meg and Burnham on who can get the edge on the other one. And like you said, he tries to use the toxic gas to get them to flush them out of the panic room, but Meg outsmarts him and lights the gas on fire, which explodes in their face on the other side of the wall. And he also, as soon as they get in there, realizes that they're going to try to call for help with the phone line. So there's this great tug of war of the phone cables, which he eventually pulls out from the wall.
Yeah, it's a great circumstance of both of them figuring out ways to... Meg's trying to figure out ways to escape or call for help. And then also with Burnham, his morality comes into play when, due to circumstances, Sarah finds herself locked in the panic room with the robbers and Meg is outside. And so the sides switch. Sarah begins having seizures. She has this medical condition. She's at risk of seizures. Meg becomes desperate, and then she manages to convince Burnham to provide the medicine and give Sarah the medicine. He didn't have to do that, but he makes the choice to help her. And also, one of my favorite parts of the film is also with this setup where the sides are switched when police officers show up after a disturbance call, and Meg has to answer the door without giving away that she's in duress in that she's being robbed, because if she gives in to the cops, the robbers are going to kill her daughter, who are in the panic room with her. And it's a great scene where Meg's trying to convince the cops that she's okay. And I think it's a great twist to the story, and they keep it interesting with scenes like this.
Burnham saves Sarah's life. He also saves Meg's life from Raul, because Burnham has the opportunity to get out of there, but because he leaves Raul with Meg, and obviously Raul is going to kill her.
The whole family is going to kill.
But Burnham comes back and eventually kills Raul, which forces him to slow down, and it ends up being one of the reasons why he gets caught by the police.
That's the main reason, because he had the bonds and he was escaping, and then he heard the screams of Meg and Sarah, and he's literally about to climb over the wall in the backyard, and he decides to go back and help them, and he ends up saving them. And then this delays him so much that the cops arrive, and by the time he goes back out to the backyard, it's already too late and the cops have showed up. So he sacrificed himself in order to save the girls, and so he does end up redeeming himself, I think, in the eyes of the audience. And this is just a really tight, taut thriller, and it's a lot of fun. I think it's Fincher's shortest movie, but it's a great thriller. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Next up, we have Zodiac, released March 2nd in 2007, written by James Vanderbilt. It stars Jake Gyllenhaal, Robert Downey Jr., Mark Ruffalo, and Anthony Edwards. The film grossed $84 million worldwide on a budget of $65 million. Ciphers and clues are sent to local newspapers by a mysterious serial killer who calls himself the Zodiac Killer. Robert Graysmith, a San Francisco cartoonist, is unable to resist the hunt and obsessively tracks his case, trying to bring him to justice.
Yeah, and this film was also based off the book by Robert Graysmith, and I think that's one of the most intriguing parts of Zodiac, is that it's a true story, and even more intriguing, it was never solved. The Zodiac Killer was never caught, and it's just a fascinating story, the things that he did and how he got away with everything. And I absolutely adore this film, despite it being almost 3 hours long. I still feel like I've seen it a dozen times.
Yeah.
And it's got, of course, the dark tones that Fincher loves to work with and intense scenes that we expect from Fincher. But at times, this can be a very light and fun film. And it almost seems like there are, 2 or 3 or 4 movies all mashed together into this one like monster movie of an investigation. We get timelines and storylines of basically the killings as well as the three different characters who are kind of like working together at times and also like passing the investigation off kind of like in a relay race. And we follow each character and characters, if they're working together, on these timelines. And it's a police procedural, but it avoids cliches. You know, there are no shootouts. There are no, doors being kicked in.
No car chases.
Yeah, no standoffs. It's all dialogue mostly.
Yeah, and like you said, this is a true story. And obviously we weren't alive when this happened, but at the time, the Zodiac was a gigantic story in American media. And
for years.
Especially in San Francisco, because people who lived in San Francisco were fearful of being victims of the Zodiac. And the Zodiac case actually changed the way policing is done in America, because one of the reasons why the investigation took so long and found so many dead ends was because the crimes took place in different counties. And because of this, back then, different police institutions, they were not working and collaborating together. They all held their own private investigations for cases, and they never shared details or worked together. And because of this, the people investigating the crimes, they were missing out on key details and important pieces of evidence from other killings and other jurisdictions that they were never given or provided. And so this is what stalled all of these investigations. And then after the Zodiac case, it was implemented into American society that police offices and agencies had to begin working together in collaboration when crimes went past jurisdictions. And so this case brought that about.
Yeah, that's just actually like intelligence agencies, how they wouldn't work together pre 9/11, but now post 9/11, once all, the NSA and the FBI and the TSA had all this information that they could have been helping each other with, and then that's helped contribute to what happened. And now they actually all do work together, and that's, I'm sure that's exactly what happened, but more on like a state police level and local police level.
Yeah, and then I think the strength of this movie is that Fincher makes you feel like you're investigating this crime, and just like in real life, the investigation took decades, and obviously they never found who the real Zodiac was, so there was no closure to the crimes itself. And just like this film, you feel the same thing as an audience member. It's a slowly paced film on purpose because Fincher wants you to feel like it was like what it was like to investigate this, and what the characters were going through and experiencing over these years and years and years of slowly gathering evidence and finding dead end after dead end. And also, just like in real life, this film ends without closure in a way.
And this movie reminds me a lot of All the President's Men, which is one of my favorite political thrillers, and it's about the journalist Woodward Bernstein who uncovered Watergate, the Nixon scandal. But, instead of two journalists, we get a cop, a journalist, and a cartoonist on the case. And the characters in this film are sensational. And this is one of Robert Downey Jr.'s biggest roles since his release from prison while he was trying to, restart his illustrious career. And this was right before he got cast as Iron Man. And I'm sure it was it was a major factor in Marvel letting Jon Favreau cast him as Tony Stark, because you see a lot of similarities between Paul Avery and Tony Stark, which I think it all stems just from Robert Downey Jr., who's absolutely phenomenal in this film. And you see that they have like the same goatee almost, and they've the arrogance and charisma, and of course that's all just Downey being Downey.
And the film he made before this was Kiss Kiss Bang Bang with Shane Black, who ended up making Iron Man 3. And that was actually his first major role after being released from prison. And also he has the same characteristics, and you can see the potential of him being Tony Stark in Kiss Bang Bang and Zodiac. And so obviously those two films were weighed heavily upon Jon Favreau casting him.
And Jake Gyllenhaal is awesome as Robert Graysmith. He's a very quiet, intelligent cartoonist, kind of like an Eagle Scout grown up. And, on paper, it probably seemed kind of like a boring role, but I think Jake knocked it out of the park with his relatability and daring nature in this film, because Jake's one of the greatest actors of his generation, hands down, despite, never winning an Oscar or anything like that. But he provides a youthful, energetic pulse for this film, and it's his obsession and fascination, which is a main theme of this film, obsession, that lets the audience and maintains the audience's obsession with the story as well.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point of the movie, is that it's not an exact, perfectly accurate depiction of the events. This film is based upon Graysmith's book, and Graysmith himself became obsessive over the investigation and obsessive over discovering who Zodiac was. And so, in several regards, Graysmith was biased in certain ways. And so we see that biased nature in the storytelling of this movie, where because it's being told in Graysmith's point of view for the most part.
This is easily my favorite Mark Ruffalo role as Inspector David Toshi, who's basically a good cop who's been dealt this shitty hand of a virtually impossible to solve case. And Toshi was actually famous in real life at the time. He tutored Steve McQueen for Bullet and was a role model for the character in Dirty Harry for Clint Eastwood.
Wow, he must have been a badass.
Yeah, so he's probably a pretty cool guy. But he did wear those bow ties and everything. And Ruffalo plays him, and not really as a hotshot officer, but more in the sense of doing things by the book because he really believes in that. And all three of these characters act as surrogates of this investigation and this journey that the audience takes in the path of trying to capture and find out who Zodiac is. And that's the thing that they all have in common is their failure, really. I mean, although you could argue that Robert is the one played by Jake who does, spoiler alerts, kind of solve the case at the end, you could think, and maybe Graysmith thinks he solved it himself too. But still, no one is brought to justice. The crime is still open. No one was ever arrested. And it's really only this newspaper cartoonist who's stubborn enough and to keep tunneling away at this journey and to try to build the most convincing case against somebody to make them guilty.
Yeah, and eventually it ends with him suspecting Arthur Lee Allen as the culprit of Zodiac, and it's obviously never proven, but both he and many of the officers investigating the case, they had him as their favorite suspect, but they never could prove it. But also, like you said, they all fail, and that's an important aspect of the story because these three characters, they go through very drastic transformations throughout the film because the investigation itself takes so long and takes so much out of them, and they all change. So, for example, Paul Avery begins as a successful, charismatic journalist who begins helping investigate this, and then he ends the film as an alcoholic recluse. And then Toshi goes from a pretty obsessive detective who's bent on finding the Zodiac for several years, and then by the second half of the film, when Graysmith starts talking to him about it, he honestly doesn't even care about Zodiac anymore. He ends up understanding that Zodiac is just a small thing in the big picture because Zodiac stopped calling, Zodiac stopped killing people, and even though Zodiac was a serial killer, he only killed a handful of people, and Toshi even says the line, do you have any idea how many people are murdered every year in San Francisco? It's hundreds. And so Zodiac isn't as big of a problem as the public maybe thought it was. And then Graysmith himself goes from a curious observer to a completely obsessed investigator of the Zodiac. And all three of these characters go through this transformation because the investigation itself is pretty much impossible to solve.
Yeah, and yes, like you said, the Zodiac only killed a handful of people compared to the amount of people who are killed every year, just in a city like San Francisco. But it's really a battle with the media and in the perception with the public that makes Zodiac such a big story and makes all these people obsess over it. And the most fascinating thing about this story and the Zodiac Killer is that all of these clues and pieces of evidence
the codes
that the killer supplied to authorities and newspapers. And the Zodiac Killer was, of course, he was clearly arrogant. He's very intelligent, but he's also very needy. He needs attention. He wants to be admired, just like a lot of serial killers. He wanted his work to be broadcast on every newspaper, every radio show, every newspaper. He also wanted to laugh in everybody's face. That's why he's sending pieces of evidence and letters into everything. And, killing wasn't enough for him. He needed to gloat about it in front of everybody in the world, knowing that no one could solve the case.
Yeah, exactly. And David Fincher films the killings in a really disturbing way. So these are some of the most disturbing killings you'll see.
It's like he kills people. That's how Fincher does it.
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
That well.
And especially that the murder in the park when he ties up that young couple and he starts stabbing them in the back, and Fincher doesn't cut away. He just holds the camera right there, and you just see the knife going in and out of their bodies. And I had never seen a stabbing filmed like that before. Usually it's a lot of quick cuts and different angles and shots cut together, but he just has a static camera and you just see the stabbing over and over again. And that was the first time I saw that. And even every time I see this, it's a very disturbing moment in an image. And I think that Fincher found a unique way to capture the murders.
Yeah, and in terms of capturing, we talked about earlier that this was the first movie that Fincher switched completely, and now his entire professional career since then has been digital cameras and digital format. And Zodiac was captured with Thomson's Viper Filmstream high-definition video cameras, which were the first HD cameras that could somewhat match the quality of film. And although I prefer film over digital, this film's beautifully shot. He got very creative with it in terms of these beautiful landscape shots and like helicopter angles and helicopter shots. There's that great shot of the skyline of the city with all the lights lit up in the fireworks show in the 4th of July.
Most of the city shots in this movie are all CGI.
Yeah, and also
completely CGI.
I love the shot in the beginning with like the sky view of the cab. Just follow. It's like a drone following a cab perfectly, but obviously that's CGI too.
And then I thought it was really smart the way he set it up, because usually if a movie takes place in San Francisco, you always see the Golden Gate Bridge in the opening of the movie. Like, oh, Golden Gate Bridge, we're in San Francisco. But instead, Fincher didn't even show the Golden Gate Bridge. And instead, in the opening, he had a shot of a helicopter push-in of the bay of San Francisco, and he digitally altered the landscape to perfectly match how the city looked in that time period. And then begins probably I think my favorite opening credit sequences in all of Fincher's movies is the POV shot of the first Zodiac letter being delivered to the San Francisco Chronicle, and how it goes through different hands and it's brought from outside by the postal worker and brought through the building and carried through the office and then eventually lands on the editor's secretary's desk. I think it's my favorite opening credits.
And comparatively to Seven, where we talked about how it's a film about murders, serial killer murders, but you never see the actual killing, you just see the end result of the killings. Zodiac he shows the killings. Also, sometimes you see the end results, but he shows what he would obviously dramatize as the killing. So again, it's the realistic, factual serial killer story versus the fictional one.
Yeah.
And obviously, I think he probably did it to set it apart from Seven.
And also, this scene has, I think, one of the scariest scenes I've seen in a long time is when Grace Smith goes to visit Vaughn in the third act of the film, and Vaughn apparently knew Rick Marshall, who is at the moment Grace Smith's number one suspect, and he's trying to find movie posters that he thinks Rick Marshall made because the handwriting from that movie poster matched the Zodiac's. And there's this amazing scene, and Vaughn reveals that he is the one who actually made the movie posters. And then Grace Smith is terrified, and then there's that scene where Vaughn leads him into the basement, and they're just both in the basement, and Grace Smith is just like, what am I doing here? And then he hears footsteps on the floor above. And it's one of the most tense scenes I've ever seen.
That's one of the most terrified I've been in a movie.
And nothing violent happens.
Horribly
That's how
terrified.
good of a director he is.
Yeah, that's a master of suspense, and
not many people have basements in California.
yeah, master of suspense and dread. That's an intense scene.
And also, Fincher places subtle hints about who could be the Zodiac. For example, in Vaughn has the basement, and there's a phone in the basement that you see for a moment, and it could be like who has a phone in their basement, especially back then, and it could be is that the phone that the Zodiac uses to call the police? And in that great scene with Arthur Lee Allen, where the police are questioning him, and they don't have any concrete evidence, it's all circumstantial, but the way that Arthur behaves, it's so strange, and it's just like got red flags all over it, like the way he crosses his legs. His watch is a Zodiac watch.
His knowledge, the knife in his trunk, and the things he knows about the cases.
Yeah, and he says the blood in my trunk was from a chicken I killed or something, and it's like
in his apartment. His trailer.
Yeah, and he's a very strange and bizarre person who seems to be like a perfect candidate. They wrote it this way and filmed it this way to allude to the fact that they created suspicious behavior to make us feel suspicious of this character and make us feel just as disoriented as the police, where this guy seems like the perfect suspect, but we have no evidence on him.
Yeah, and John Carroll Lynch plays Arthur Lee Allen, and he's so good in this movie.
He's a great character actor.
Yeah, and he's chilling. I think it's an underrated performance because there's so many top list top billed actors in this movie.
Yeah.
And there's that great line where he's like, "I'm not the Zodiac, and if I was, I wouldn't tell you."
I certainly wouldn't tell you.
And also his watch too, the symbol, it's a Zodiac watch, which is the symbol of the Zodiac. So Arthur Lee Allen, Lee, is clearly the number one suspect for the entire movie, really, for the audience and for Robert Graysmith and for all the cops. And at the end of the film, it's Lee who Graysmith goes to see, because Graysmith, I'm sure he did this in real life, and he thinks that he solved the case. And for him, that's his whole obsession, is he just has to know. He can't explain why he has to know, but he just has to find out who it is and who did all this. And that's that scene representing where he walks up to Lee Allen while he's just working at that hardware store, and he just looks at him. He just stares at him.
Yeah.
Doesn't say a word.
He just slightly nods, too.
And you know Lee knows that's why he's there.
Also, at the very end of the film, the surviving victim of that San Francisco shooting positively identifies Arthur Lee Allen from a photo. And that's the end of the film. And so what happened right after that was Arthur Lee Allen died, I think, of a heart attack. So they're never able to continue the investigation into him or question him again because he died.
But it's strongly insinuated that he's the one who did it.
Yeah. And again, that's because the film is told through the perspective of Graysmith, who wrote the book, and he alludes to the idea that Allen is the Zodiac.
I'm sure there's a book that disproves a lot of the things he wrote. So it's just a great film, and it's a great story, and it's not what happened, but the fascinating nature of what happened.
Yeah, I love this movie. It's a fantastic depiction of obsession and mystery. And if you haven't seen it, I think it's on Netflix. You got to check it out. It's a long movie, but it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it's a borderline masterpiece. And you know what? I know some people don't like long movies, and probably some people think it's slow and boring, but this is a phenomenal film. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just always love seeing actors like Ruffalo and Downey when they're not in superhero costumes.
Yeah, and it's a masterclass in directing, hands down. Mm-hmm. The next film on the episode is The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which came out on Christmas Day in 2008. The film was written by Eric Roth, based on a short story by F. Scott Fitzgerald. The film stars Brad Pitt, Kate Blanchett, Tilda Swinton, Taraji P. Henson, and Mahershala Ali. The film had a worldwide box office of $335 million on a budget of $150 million. Benjamin Button is a man who ages backwards as he tries to find his place in a world full of fate and coincidence, in a world that he doesn't fit in.
This is David Fincher's most beautiful film. And even though most of his movies, like we say, tackle very dark and perverse themes, this one tackles love and fate and time and coincidence and life. And is really refreshing to see those themes tackled by Fincher with his aesthetic and his story telling and visuals. And this is one of my favorite Fincher movies, and I think it's also underrated.
Yeah, it's a well-crafted film, groundbreaking special effects for the time, and you can tell it set the stage for, obviously, big blockbuster films we're seeing today. And
also set the stage for Social Network.
Yeah, and yeah, for sure with Armie Hammer.
Yeah.
And his character, the Winklevoss twins, and this is Fincher's most awarded film, but also it's heavily criticized. I think it's only like 72% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I think that it's a fantasy story that Fincher is trying to bring into reality. And, you know, this is a highly unusual individual, and he tries to make it seem like it could be a real condition in the real world, and it could be possible. And that's the interesting thing about Benjamin Button. He seems to be, you know, time is a major factor in this, major theme in this story. And it's almost like Benjamin Button is in the wrong reality. You know, he could have been, maybe he's meant to be born somewhere else. And maybe there's a normal Benjamin Button that's stuck in that reality that he's from.
I think that Benjamin was meant to be born here, because I look at the idea of time in this film, and the way they speak about it is the idea that there's a correlation between both Benjamin and that giant clock in the station.
That Gateau made.
Yeah, so that clock also goes backwards. And Benjamin was actually born the same time that clock was installed, and the clock also is taken down from the station when Benjamin dies.
And it's replaced with the digital clock.
Exactly. So it's replaced with a digital clock, and the reason for that is it's a reflection of the fact that, like, the modern world is forgetting about its past, and history has become less important to people nowadays. People are less interested in the past and less interested in history. They'd rather stay in the moment or just look ahead, and they don't want to learn from the past anymore. And so the idea of a clock going backwards and a person aging backwards details the importance of being able to look back on history and look back on your past, in how we all have our own personal histories. And at the end of your life, when you're on your deathbed, what are you going to be thinking about? You're going to be thinking about things that happened in your past. You're going to be thinking about your own history. And so it's important to have a relationship with the past, because you can't move into the future without it. And so I think that's why Benjamin and that clock reverse.
Yeah, and because eventually time comes for all of us.
And that's shown in the shot when the flood takes place in the basement and it overtakes the clock, because time comes for us all.
Filming Brad Pitt and Cate Blanchett to an extent in this film was, again, groundbreaking. So they had to figure out how to reverse age somebody who's born old and dies young as an infant and as a baby. And so Benjamin Button has this rare condition where he's birthed as an old man, but the size of an infant and the size of a baby. And the way they filmed Brad Pitt throughout his life, and as he's aged very old and then becomes very young, is the de-aging was a little easier with CGI, but to film Brad Pitt as an old man, they used body doubles, and at times CGI body doubles, and they superimposed basically his head or his face onto an actor. And what they did was they basically filmed Brad in like this motion capture chamber, basically, where he recorded all of his lines, and they got several different camera angles of his face and his head, running dialogue as Benjamin Button in all those different scenes. And they basically just take that image and superimpose it on top of the body double, and then obviously changing that image to make him aged. And it's obviously a very tedious process, but it's highly effective. And again, and this is 2008, and it still looks pretty good today.
I think it's still seamless, and it looks fantastic. And when especially the shots when he looks like he's like in his 80s and 90s, and he's very short and frail, and they really made it seem like that's an accurate portrayal of what Brad would look like when he's in his 80s or 90s.
Still a good-looking guy.
And Fincher actually got the script for this movie in 2002, but obviously they had no way of making this. They didn't have technology, so he sat on the script and waited for technology to develop so that he could actually film it.
The script is even older than that. Jack Nicholson was actually attached to maybe if they could try to make a film about this years ago, but they obviously would have had to use 5 different actors for the role for all the different stages of his life. So that obviously probably wouldn't work, because, you need the lead actor to pretty much portray as many of those ages as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so aside from time, I think the next biggest theme of this movie is the idea of fate and coincidence. And are they separate, or do they go together? And do we have control of our lives, or does fate decide the things that happen to us, or are they just coincidences? And I think that this is explained in the best way through the story of how Daisy gets hit by the car, because in the scene where Daisy gets hit by the car, because it shows the preceding moments of circumstance which led to that specific car hitting her in that specific moment at that specific spot. And it led to the woman answering her phone, and then taking a moment in her apartment, and then getting picked up by the driver who does other little things, and that led to them being at that precise moment where they hit Daisy. And it's the idea that all these little interactions, are they all coincidences, or is it all fatalism? And was Daisy always meant to get hit by that car? Or is it just a coincidence, because if that woman or driver did anything differently, if they changed one moment or paused for a second, they wouldn't have hit her?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of both, but also fate is a little bit of everything, because yes, you can wake up tomorrow and you get to decide, what you're going to have for lunch, and you get to decide what clothes you're going to wear, and you get to decide what way you're going to take to go to the grocery store or drive to work. But you can't decide if a plane's going to fall and crash on your house. You can't control that. You can't control, for the most part, like Daisy can't control getting hit by that car in that car accident. So fate you can control, but also there's that sense of you can't control what's going to happen to you because you can't know what will happen to you. You don't know.
Yeah, you don't know, and you have no control. And in a way, you create your own fate because, like, say, for example, I got in a car accident tomorrow.
I'd be very distraught.
So, if you think about it, every decision and moment of my life led to that car accident. You know what I mean? Going back to a child, every tiny little moment, every little thing had a tiny influence on me being at that spot at that certain time, and also for that other person being there at that certain time. And it doesn't have
butterfly effect.
Yeah, the butterfly effect. It doesn't have to be just like if I had changed something that morning, but everything influenced that moment happening.
That's like when I like to, when we talk about our show and our podcast and how we started, like it's a chain reaction of events that happened over a course of several years that came to this show.
Yeah, exactly. And so this life is a series of moments and interactions and experiences which propel us on this path. And we don't know where this path is going, but it is in a way, it's being determined by our choices and actions. And anything can happen tomorrow, but whatever happens tomorrow is influenced by what we've done throughout our entire lives.
Now, despite Benjamin's appearance, his mind is of whatever age he really is. So when he looks like an old man, he's really just a child internally. And when he looks like a child, he's an old man eternally. And even as a baby being held by Daisy, who is an old woman towards the end of the film, you can tell that it has, like, I don't know if they must use like CGI because you can't teach a baby how to act.
It's a little flat this time. Can we give it a little more emotion?
A little more emotion,
Come on,
Stephanie.
baby.
But you can see the look in the baby's eyes is that of an old senile man who maybe recognizes the person that's holding them, even though it looks like a 7-month-old child.
Yeah. And we've in our life, we've gone through, someone close to us has suffered from dementia and Alzheimer's. So we understand what that relationship is like, and it's difficult for the loved ones of that person. And this film had such a unique take on that idea of, since he ages backwards, he would develop dementia as a young boy. And he shows up at the home as looks like a 9 or 10-year-old who can't really remember who he is or where he came from. And it's such a brilliant way to tell the third act of the story.
Yeah, because people who do suffer from dementia and Alzheimer's and whose memories start to fade, which they can't control, there are these glimpses where, they do recognize you. They do remember things from their past. They can't connect dots, and it's very momentary. And I think that's what we see. And it's better I think it was more effective to tell the story with the character going through that rather than an elderly person who doesn't go through memory loss like that, because then it would have been a different third act and it would have been not as emotionally heartbreaking as it was.
Yeah, and the connection between Daisy and Benjamin is the heart and the center of this movie. And for decades, Benjamin has always felt a great amount of love for her, but every time they connected or met, it was just never quite right for them to be together. And there are several moments throughout their lives where, like, for example, he sees her in New York and she has a boyfriend, and she's going through this phase of her life of experiencing life, and she doesn't want to settle down, but that's something he's always wanted. And so they're never able to fully connect every time they meet. But then they finally get together when they're both meeting in the middle, is what they say. And they've both reached this moment where age-wise they've reached the same moment, but also in their personal lives they're ready to have a relationship with each other. So they've met at the perfect time, and it's the middle of both of their lives.
Yeah, and probably the most heartbreaking part of this entire story is the fact that this great love never gets to fully be shared or explored or experienced. We just have that momentary time where they're actually together for a decent amount of time. But other than that, they're kind of just like coincidentally meet up or run into each other, or they have quick little romantic spells. And aside from that, there's situations where he's an old man and she's a young girl, or he's a young boy and she's an old woman. And so it never really matches up for timing for them.
Yeah, and when they are together and they have a child, it's tragic because Benjamin understands that he can't be in this child's life as their father, because there's going to come to a point where he and the child meet in the middle in the same way that he and Daisy did, where they're going to be the same age. And then when the child becomes an adult, Benjamin's going to be a child.
Benjamin Button's it's a really great movie. We also get some great supporting acting from Mahershala Ali and Taraji P. Henson. They give phenomenal performances and act as parental figures for Benjamin as he ages, because he does get abandoned by his father and his family.
Yeah, this is a beautiful film about timeless themes. I do really think it's one of Fincher's most underrated films. Next up, we have The Social Network, released October 1st in 2010, written by Aaron Sorkin. This film stars Jesse Eisenberg, Andrew Garfield, Justin Timberlake, and Armie Hammer. This film grossed a worldwide box office of $224 million on a budget of $40 million. Mark Zuckerberg, an unknown Harvard student, creates a social networking site that quickly grabs the attention of the masses. Jumping between the rise of the company and the lawsuits that occur, you see the fruition of an idea that one day became a $527 billion company with over 900 million members.
I think this is Fincher's best movie and one of the best films made this century. And somehow it lost Best Picture to The King's Speech, which is a very good movie, but The King's Speech has already been forgotten generally. And I mean, whereas The Social Network, it's still being discussed, analyzed, and studied, and outside of its relevance to modern society. And it will be continually discussed after this. And I think people think there's an expiration date to this film because of its relevance to Facebook. And they say that if Facebook ever dies, this film will ever die. But this movie is not about Facebook. It's about relationships. It's about betrayal. It's about connection. So there are a lot of underlying themes about this movie, and it's not really just about Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. It's a movie about the development of the most revolutionary piece of technology in decades, but ultimately it's not about technology. And the thing with Facebook is we know what it had become. By the time this film came out, it was a dominating force in the world, but we didn't know how it happened. We knew what happened, but we didn't know how it happened. And I think Sorkin's story is a fascinating portrayal of the scenes that took place to develop this newfound technology.
And one of my favorite parts of this movie is Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's score. It's unique, it's sensational. At times it's disturbing, curious, it's chaotic, and it attacks you at times, just like the film. And a quick fun fact is Aaron Sorkin, the writer, also has a cameo in this film. And this film is incredibly well acted by Jesse Eisenberg, Andrew Garfield, Armie Hammer, as well as great supporting roles from Justin Timberlake and Rooney Mara.
And I think this is probably my favorite use of nonlinear storytelling by Aaron Sorkin, because he sets up this film by establishing Mark Zuckerberg, his character, who he is, where he lives, and eventually the driving force and motivation of creating a new website. And then he has the establishment of the character, and then we cut to the deposition rooms, and we quickly learn that he's being sued by both the Winklevi and Eduardo, and Eduardo specifically is suing him for $600 million. And so that's the 20 minutes in the movie. That's what we learn. And I think most writers and filmmakers would have told the story from beginning to end, but by skipping ahead and showing the depositions and the actual lawsuits taking place, it was a great way to tell the story.
Yeah, and Sorkin and Fincher somehow made the story of Mark Zuckerberg and turned it into one of the most exciting dramas in years. And maybe the relevance of Zuckerberg in our daily lives makes it even more relatable, but I think Sorkin's script is remarkable, and it deserved the Academy Award he got for it. And I love the way they open this movie up with, which is basically just that conversation between Mark and his girlfriend at the time, played by Rooney Mara. This opening scene completely depicts Mark Zuckerberg and his personality and his character, and it's basically we're trying to kind of like decipher this conversation that Mark Zuckerberg is having with Erica. And it's as if, you know, he's so fluent in code and computer programs. It's like he speaks in codes, and it's like he speaks like the programs he creates with incredible speed and veracity of words. And it's like he's having like 4 different conversations with Erica, who's trying to keep up with 1 or 2 of those conversations that he's having, while he's also having other conversations in his mind and other thoughts in his mind running in the background, kind of like a web browser. It's like his brain is a web browser with 12 tabs open, and you're doing like 10 things at once. And the scene perfectly illustrates Mark's genius intellect as well as his inability to connect with people.
Yeah, Erica is just doing her best just to keep up with what he's talking about. And Mark even ends up being annoyed and frustrated with her inability to stay up to date with what exactly he's talking about in the moment. And she's just stumbling over what he's saying. And she'll be responding to a comment about SAT scores, and then he's talking about China. And she thinks they're talking about the same thing, but he's like, no, what are you talking about? That's not what I'm talking about anymore. And so he's constantly skipping ahead. And also the scene shows that he's an insecure person who, when his abilities come into question, he has to defend himself by putting himself on a pedestal. For example, when Erica says that she finds appealing, she finds rowers appealing, then he reveals, yes, I did get 1,600 on the SAT. Before, he ignored her asking about his SAT score like it was no big deal. But once he feels slighted, he has to put that fact out in front of her. So he's constantly defending himself and his insecurities. And this is the first instance of that.
And like computer code, Mark is tone deaf and he lacks emotion. He thinks like a computer, or maybe computers think like him. He has no filter. He'll blurt out anything that comes out of his head. And he feels like no human deserves his full attention. You know, it's mentioned a few times, especially during the deposition where they're asking if he has their attention. He tells them, you have the most minute amount of my attention, because he doesn't think other people are equal to him intellectually, so they don't deserve his full attention. And in a way, we've all kind of become like Mark, where we all have these connections and friends, but we don't really know any of them. We seldom see them in person, if we've ever even met them in person. And many of us use online social networks the way that Mark in this film and the story uses real-life social networks to try to improve his life or get ahead.
And also, Mark reacts horribly to rejection, because after Erica breaks up with him after that opening scene, that's what drives him to first write that horrible blog posts about her, and then that is the catalyst to him feeling motivated to create Face Smash.
Yeah, so Face Smash is kind of like this piece of a puzzle that Mark Zuckerberg uses in his brain that mashes with other pieces of puzzles that gives him like the idea of Facebook. And Face Smash is one of those catalysts. The other one is the idea that the Winklevoss twins pitch him, but it's just not that good of an idea. So he puts like all these ideas going on in his head together, and it creates that spark. And I love this scene with the Face Smash, because Fincher is cross-cutting Mark creating a mildly sophisticated program of ranking girls' photos, while the guys that are in those exclusive clubs that he wishes he was a part of are, partying with girls. And it's a great metaphor for how Mark Zuckerberg's potential would put him on a level of exclusivity that those guys would never reach in their entire lives. And it's ironic that the girls that they're partying with, they're getting naked with those guys. And whereas on the Face Smash program, the guys are just basically rating girls on their looks.
So I think that's exactly the point where Zuckerberg and his friends through Face Smash are objectifying women, but then the women are objectifying themselves at that party. So it's an ironic catch-22 where both parties are guilty in some way. And then you're right, this Face Smash was one piece of the puzzle, and with Face Smash, he discovered the desire for something like this, because the site got 22,000 hits in like 2 hours and broke the system. And so we saw the potential that combining social media with attraction and sex created this explosion of traffic. And so this was him realizing, I think, that the importance of social life and sexual life, and how they're entwined, and how social media, especially Facebook, found so much success because when we were young and we were using Facebook, it was important to see if like a girl you liked, if their profile said single or dating or in a relationship.
Yeah,
that's the driving force of people.
That's the final piece of code that he wrote for Facebook before they launched this, because he had the idea, but it didn't seem finished yet, and he had been building the program while, keeping the Winklevoss twins at bay about what they wanted from him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when that person comes into him in class and asks him, hey, do you know if this girl is single? Do you know if she's dating anybody? And then he realizes that's the final key, is to put relationship status, because everyone wants to know how to make an emotional connection or physical connection online. And that's sex drives pretty much everything for young people, and a lot of people even in their older age.
Yeah, sex drives behavior. And fun fact, his roommate, that friend of his, that's the kid from Jurassic Park.
Oh, no way.
Yes.
You're right. That is him.
And now for all you young kids who are listening, Facebook, when it first launched, was not what it's like now. So Facebook, it was like pretty much like a basic desktop page. It had some photos.
It's kind of like MySpace. There actually wasn't even photo tagging in this. You just had a couple of photos. You had your profile photo, and then you had friends, and you could like chat with your friends, and you can make posts on your page. But that was the initial Facebook, and then it slowly developed and evolved into different ways. For example, adding photos in photo albums, and then being able to tag people in your photos. And so Facebook slowly developed all of these social media ideas that we're used to. It slowly implemented this over time. It's not like Facebook launched and it had everything set perfectly. They slowly made it better as time progressed. And this film, I think, it's fascinating because they show the progression of Facebook. Yeah, I remember when they launched the wall, which is like your
it
page.
was a big deal.
Everyone was like, what is the wall?
Look at this wall.
It's so dumb. And then like the feed. And so like they know exactly what they're doing.
And also, I had no idea that Facebook was created at Harvard, in that it was an exclusive website for only people at that school. And then as they branched out, they only branched out to other colleges at first. So it got to the point where maybe a dozen colleges had Facebook, and then it slowly began rolling out to bigger audiences. So it's fascinating to see how Facebook began.
Yeah, and status is a main theme of this film, is something that drives Mark Zuckerberg, because he was never really interested in money. He was more interested in increasing his status in life. And he's obsessed with it. And he wants to belong to the elite. He wants to be admired. That's why he blogs. He wants people to read what he writes and wants to see what he's doing. And he's basically an anti-hero in the first, hour and a half of this movie. He's not very likable. He does some shady things to friends. But towards the end of the film, you kind of get on his side and realize the visionary that he was, and what he created changed the world forever.
But you're right. He absolutely is not fueled by money, but he's fueled by the desire for recognition. And he actually hints at this in that first conversation with Erica, where he asks her, how does someone set themselves apart from other people if all of the people scored 1,600 on the SAT? So he's obsessed with distinguishing himself from the pack. And so his driving force in his life is being able to branch out and become his own person and do something greater than everyone else.
Yeah, and that's why he's at Harvard. There are two reasons I think he's at Harvard. Obviously, it's a very prestigious school, but also it's more than just being smart. It's getting ahead, and it offers all these connections, and just like social networks online, it was like those in-person connections that really drove interaction and helped people get ahead. And also, to me, Zuckerberg's such a genius, and Harvard, for these high intellectuals, it's really kind of just like a limbo kind of place where they have to just check it off their list, and they have to just do it.
It's part of like the requirement.
Yeah, it's part of like their future resume. So even though he's smarter than his professors, and that's why he's drinking on a Tuesday night, creating face smash for fun, he doesn't have to go to Harvard because he's a freaking genius, but he kind of also has to go to Harvard.
And he has resentment towards people like the Winklevoss twins, who got into Harvard because of who their parents are and who their family is, less so because of their intellect and skills. And he also resents the fact that he can't get into finals club, any of the finals clubs. And
it's final club, not finals club.
And that ends up breeding a great amount of resentment and tension between him and Eduardo, because Eduardo starts getting attention from the Phoenix Club, which ends up making Mark extremely jealous and even passive aggressive towards him, where he even says the comment, "Oh, yeah, you're probably right. It was probably a diversity thing for them picking you
because he's Brazilian."
Yeah.
And Eduardo is really Mark's only friend, and they have a strained relationship because, again, Mark can't emotionally connect with people, even though Eduardo can. it takes a toll on them, and Mark ends up betraying Eduardo, who's his only best friend, because he basically trades in his best friend for Sean Parker later on in the film and in the story to increase his status and to get networked, in-person networking, and in person with cool people who know the industry.
Yeah, and basically nearly every conversation with Mark and Eduardo revolves around Mark needing something from Eduardo. I can't remember how many times, it might be 6 or 7 times he says to Eduardo, I need ... He needs something, money, the emails for the Phoenix Club. So he always is using Eduardo for his resources to benefit himself. And then I know that this is not a perfectly accurate portrayal of Mark Zuckerberg in real life. I'm sure he's not as ruthless as he made him seem in this film, but also you cannot deny the fact that he did a horrible thing to his best friend by deceiving him into losing all of his shares in the company of Facebook. It is a horrible thing that really happened.
Yeah, it's too bad because Eduardo seems like a very loyal friend and hardworking, and he actually genuinely seems like he cares about Mark, whether or not they actually had as strong a relationship as you might think. And Sean ends up using Mark, as well as Mark using Eduardo and Mark using Sean eventually. And the only person who doesn't make out until later on is Eduardo. So he kind of the three of the trio, he gets axed from the company.
I love how, as the story is unfolding, it's being told to us both in the scenes, but also in the depositions, where we're learning more about motivations, where we're learning more about decisions and communications between these characters through the various depositions between the Winklevosses and with Eduardo Saverin. And as the film progresses and we go through more of the deposition scenes, we begin to learn that Mark is a manipulator, and he's a master manipulator. And it gets to the point where maybe he doesn't even know that he's doing anything wrong half the time, because you can't help but deny that although he technically, yes, he did not steal any code from the Winklevosses, but he was leading them on and gaslighting them for an entire month while he was building the Facebook. And clearly he knew that he was breaking some kind of morality, because that's why he would lie to the Winklevosses. Because if he was a moral person, he would have dropped out of that project right away, but instead he delayed their site from going up because he knew it would create competition for the site that he has an idea for. So he manipulated the Winklevosses to prevent them from building their site, which allowed the Facebook to take over the campus.
Yeah, and that's the main conflict of the film is the legal dispute of the Winklevoss twins, who claim that Mark Wahlberg, that Marky Mark, who claim that Mark Zuckerberg stole their idea for Facebook. When really, when you look at it technically, he didn't steal any of their code or anything. And there's that great line where Mark says, if you were the inventors of Facebook, you would have invented Facebook. And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't the deposition dialogue incredibly accurate to the actual depositions?
Yeah, so it's not word for word, but Aaron Sorkin was allowed to look through all of the depositions with lawyers present in the room with him, and he spent several days researching through the deposition. So a lot of the dialogue is very much accurate to what happened in those deposition rooms.
And the Winklevoss twins are played both by Armie Hammer, and they filled this with a combination of camera angle tricks, CGI, and split screen takes. And Hammer played the main twin in each shot whenever they are on camera together. For the shots included the twins at the same time. And Josh Pence, an actor, stood in for the second twin. And throughout the filming of other scenes, they would just constantly basically switch chairs if it's like the back of someone's shoulder or something like that. And the same thing with Benjamin Button. They put Hammer into a little more of an advanced like motion capture box where that was this incredibly well lit like cube circle kind of thing. And they strapped his head into a harness, and he would film the twins in voice for each of the scenes, and then they would digitally superimpose that onto Josh Pence's face.
The Social Network has more visual effects shots than the new Godzilla film does.
That's insane.
That's crazy. It has over 1,000 special effects shots because of how they filmed the twins. This film was a breakthrough for all three of these actors, and especially Armie Hammer, because I don't think I had seen him in anything before this. Andrew Garfield, he was in Boy A and a couple other films, and then Jesse Eisenberg was in a few films, but obviously this was the breakout for all of them. But for Armie Hammer, I think this was a huge breakout for him. He's fantastic in this movie, and I think He plays two characters, and they're great antagonists for Mark. As Armie Hammer showed in Call Me by Your Name, extremely talented actor. And so that's the first deposition, and then the second deposition is the lawsuit of Eduardo is suing Mark because what happened was when the company went public and they diluted their shares in order to give to new investors, Mark pretty much deceived Eduardo and had him sign contracts that he thought were in his favor, but ended up taking all of Eduardo's shares and giving them the shares to new investors. And Eduardo, after the company went public, wound up with 0.03% stock in Facebook.
And you can also say, this was a terrible thing for Mark and Sean to do to Eduardo, but, at the same time, he did sign the papers. He should have taken the proper precautions and looked through the papers himself and have lawyers look at them. But also, what saved Eduardo's ass is that original articles written about Facebook and lots of evidence and data list him as a co-founder of Facebook, meaning that he has a right to 50% of that company, which is why that incredible scene when he comes into Facebook headquarters and he smashes Mark Zuckerberg's computer and he's like, I'm not coming for 30%, I'm coming for everything. And I love the scene because it's the first time we see a look on Mark Zuckerberg's face where he's vulnerable, he's in trouble.
And I was surprised that Andrew Garfield didn't get nominated for this movie because that scene alone is the best bit of acting in the entire film for every actor. He absolutely owns that scene, and you can see so much pain and betrayal and then anger and rage in him, and he goes through all of this, and Fincher does that great shot where he dollies with Andrew as he approaches Jesse Eisenberg, and it's a fantastic moment. And it's a vital moment to the development of the friendship where it's over now. And then Eduardo says in that deposition, I was your only friend. You had one friend. And then Mark, since he was so blinded by Sean Parker, he was so blinded by building the company up, he abandoned his only friend. And by the end of the film, Mark realizes after the depositions are over that he really doesn't have any friends. And what happens is the ending of this film, it can be seen in several ways. And the way I look at it is what happens in the film is Mark is alone in the deposition room and he's on Facebook and he finds Erica Albright's profile and he sends her a friend request. And then we see him refresh it over and over again. And he's just staring at the screen. While this is taking place, the song Baby You're a Rich Man by the Beatles is playing. And that song is about pretty much understanding that what you already have is enough and just love what you got, essentially. And so I think in this moment, Mark is finally understanding that the relationships you have with people are the most important thing in life and what matters most. And he's finally reaching out to a person for the first time in this film, and he's trying to make an actual, genuine human connection.
I look at it in a different way. I see that it's an ultimate act of irony that he's becoming a user of his creation. And it's ironic because he created the most popular program, social media network on the existence of the entire planet for who knows how long that will last. And he still can't connect with people. He still can't emotionally connect with people. And he has become a user on this program in an attempt to try, like you said, try to reach out to somebody. And it's just an ultimate form of irony.
That's a fun way to look at it too. I can totally see that.
And also, the entire irony of this whole story is that the most antisocial person you can think of, again, created this massive social network that everyone uses. And also, this ending shot is really great, and this ending scene is great because he's talking with the girl Marilyn, played by Rashida Jones, and she says, "You're not an asshole. You're not an asshole, Mark. You're just trying so hard to be." Whereas in the beginning of the film, Erica says, "You're an asshole." So it's kind of like a full circle for his character.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't specifically say how much the Winklevoss twins or Eduardo Saverin got paid, but
no, they say the Winklevoss.
Oh, how much did they get paid?
I think the Winklevoss, it was like in the 60s or $80 million.
That's crazy. I think that people are estimating that Eduardo got $600 million from Facebook for the lawsuit.
I believe that for sure.
Which is crazy amount of money.
He's now a billionaire.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'm sure.
And they also put his name back on the masthead as well.
Yeah, so that was a big important step for him too, for his conditions.
Yeah, but ultimately, this is such a fascinating look at how the story played out and how Facebook was built. And this app, even though Facebook obviously is not as popular as it used to be, not saying they don't have a lot of members, but it's less cool than it used to be. It still owns all the apps that are cool now.
Yeah,
and so
it owns Instagram.
It's not like it doesn't have it's losing its power. Facebook has become just one of the most companies and the most powerful companies in general. It's right up there with Apple and Google. So it's become a power in this world that we still don't even know what it's going to be able to do in 20 years. Who knows what Facebook's going to be capable of. And it's just fascinating to think that all this was built in a dorm room with code written on a window.
An algorithm.
You're right, an algorithm. I'm not a nerd like you. All this algorithm written on the window, it's
I'm
not
just
a code.
being factual to the story. You want to be fucking making shit up over there.
Mark Zuckerberg actually took some of his employees to see this film together. And after the film, he said most of it's not true. But he did say that they captured his wardrobe perfectly with the sandals and socks and nothing but sweatpants and hoodies.
Yeah, I think he said he had every piece of wardrobe that was in the film.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
We have now The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which was directed in 2011, written by Steve Zalen, based on the book by Stieg Larsson. The film stars Daniel Craig, Christopher Plummer, and Rooney Mara. The movie had a worldwide box office of $232 million and a budget of $90 million. Disgraced journalist Mikael Blomkvist is hired to investigate the 40-year-old unsolved murder of Harriet Vanger by her uncle Heinrich. Tattooed hacker Elizabeth Salander is hired to investigate Mr. Blomkvist and then eventually helps Mr. Blomkvist on a journey to uncover a secret history.
This is an unbelievable film, and I love the original Swedish trilogy, and I love the novels. And I think that Fincher elevated the story to new heights because of how good of a filmmaker he is. And this is a very dense movie. This movie has, I think, 5 acts in it, and there's a lot of story to be told. And so this film actually has like several films in it. It's even, if you think about it, Lisbeth and Mikael have their own little movies before they even meet in this film. And then there's another entirely independent kind of movie after the climax of this film. So this film is just very dense with material, and it's hard to believe that Fincher packed so much into this film.
Yeah, and Elizabeth Salander is one of the most interesting characters written in this 21st century, and she's a provocative character in the modern world. She's antisocial, she's bisexual, has bold piercings, tattoos, dresses in a very unique way, has basically a custom hairstyle. She's anti-conformity, anti-establishment. So she flips the archetype of like a Hollywood film hero or heroine on its head, and it succeeds so well. And she's also a genius. She has a photographic memory. She's an expert hacker, but she has a very dark past of emotional and physical trauma. And she unfortunately has minimal control of her life, and even her finances are controlled by social workers because she had been deemed unfit to live her life without supervision.
David Fincher reveals her in such a brilliant way. And I'm nothing against the original Swedish movie, but the way that director revealed Lisbeth is the two men in the company walk into the meeting room, and she's then waiting for them. And it's the older man is obviously surprised by how she looks, and then that's it. But with this film, David Fincher is such a great filmmaker, and he understands tension and how to build tension. And for example, he slowly reveals Lisbeth in a really unique way where first her superior is speaking with the businessman who wants to hire her, and he's describing Lisbeth and saying how people don't like her. She's very strange. She's very different. She's brilliant, but she's very unique. And then while this is happening, Fincher is watching Lisbeth arrive on site on a motorcycle, and then it cuts to her in the elevator going up the floors, but the camera stays behind her, so we don't even know what her face looks like yet. But we can see a little bit of the hair, we can see the earrings, so we can see that her look is a little strange. And then next he shows her walking through the offices, and we're still behind her. The camera's following behind her, and rather than seeing Lisbeth, we're still seeing the back of her head, but instead we're seeing the reactions of all the other people in the office as they see her and are shocked by her appearance. And then her body language is, her head's down, she's hunched over, and she's moving as quickly as she can through the office, and she opens the doors quickly. And then he finally shows Elizabeth's face when she enters that room. And Fincher built up this anticipation to the final reveal of Lisbeth, which is such a brilliant directorial decision of how to show this iconic character for the first time.
This series of books is called the Millennium Saga. It's a trilogy of books written by Stieg Larsson, who he actually died before these were ever published. And he had submitted them to a publisher in 2004 after writing the first 3 novels, and he actually had 10 that he planned on doing, but he suffered a sudden heart attack at age 50 years old when he was climbing up the 197 stairs to the apartment that he shared with his partner of 32 years. And it's unfortunate what happened to him. He never got to see his novels published.
It's an ironic tragedy right there.
Turned into books.
Because this became such a sensation around the world.
Yeah, but his partner and his family had the books made, and I think they've even tried to make a 4th version of the series. But this is an incredibly successful book series. It took Europe by storm, then it came to America and took this country by storm. And there are a lot of themes in these stories that are relevant to today's society, specifically equality, injustice, abuse, discrimination, because
privacy.
Yeah, privacy, and because Elizabeth has spent her entire life basically being attacked and demeaned, and because she's different and she's had a horrible past. And also the themes of the press and media and what that can do to a society and to people, and how it's affected the character Michael Blomkvist's career, and how he's basically forced into retirement.
Yeah, what happens is Mikael, he loses a libel suit against the businessman, the business heavyweight Weinerstrom, and he's destroyed by the media and the press, and he has to forfeit his stake in the Millennium Company. And his character gets to the point where he just wants to hide and leave and just like hide under a rock. But then this leads to him meeting with Wenger, who offers him a job. And the job would be to investigate the mysterious disappearance of his niece, Harriet. And in return, Wenger would help him destroy Weinerstrom.
But also, he's not supposed to be doing it so that anyone else in the family knows what he's doing. So it's under the false pretenses that he's writing a book about the family. This gives him access to the Wenger family, and he gets to interview each of the family members, the brothers and sisters. And so he gives him complete access to the family. He's living on their island while he's supposedly writing this book.
Yeah, and so Mikael is trying to find clues, and his main goal is to find something that the investigators of the disappearance couldn't find. And then that reaches pretty much the end of that initial first story from Mikael. And then while this is happening, we finish up Lisbeth's story, and her first story is the situation with her new guardian. Her original guardian passed away, and so she's been stuck with this new guardian, Bierman, who ends up being a monstrous person, who sexually abuses her in exchange for giving her her own money. And Lisbeth has lost power in her life. She can't go anywhere, do anything, or use or take money from her bank accounts without permission from this guardian. And so she devises a way to gain her power back, and it ends up being both the most intense but also gratifying scenes of the movie.
Yeah, Solander occupies the role of both a victim and a survivor in that first act of her story, and fortunately escapes that brutality and oppression and turns the tables on that guy, and he gets basically everything that he deserved, with a tattoo on his chest
that says I'm a sadist and a rapist,
and also what she does to him with the I'm not going to say it on camera and on audio, but this gives her power back in her life, and she eventually gets also hired to work with Blomkvist on the supposed book, but the investigation.
And the reason why Mikael hires her is because he learns that she put together this investigatory package for her boss, and Mikael discovers that Lisbeth found out things about him that nobody else could have found out. It's impossible that she found this out, so he realizes, I need this person to help me out with this job.
Yeah, in a way, Lisbeth is kind of like a superhero. She has like superhuman abilities, like her photographic memory, as well as her hacking skills, put her in this elite position to be able to, find out any kind of information she can get that she needs. But her weakness, and probably her only weakness, is her past, which has formulated a lot of her emotional issues in her life. And like these memories of her past abuse are kind of like her kryptonite.
And it's also a explanation for her appearance. They don't really go much into detail in the movie, but in the novel, it's explained that Lisbeth puts on this appearance of the gothic looks, the crazy hair, the piercings, the all black, and she puts on this abnormal appearance because it's a way to keep people away from her. Because she's kind of afraid of all people, and she doesn't want to interact or connect with anyone because of her traumatic past. And so the best way of avoiding people is to make them want to avoid you.
And we get surprisingly great chemistry between Blomkvist and Elizabeth Salander, who you think would never be able to work together because they're polar opposites, but they do work very well together, and they eventually form an intimate relationship while they're investigating this disappearance. And this film has an incredible twist ending where they're investigating the family, and they're also at the same time seem to be getting hunted by the person who committed this act is onto them, because the person leaves a dead cat outside the door, and they also chase Blomkvist with a rifle shooting at him. So,
and the biggest clue that Blomkvist found is that through looking through photographs of the parade the day Harriet disappeared, he discovers several photographs, and if he put them in his computer as a slideshow, and then he found out that her face and the photograph changed from enjoying the parade to seeing something that brought about great fear in her face. And then she left the scene, and that was the last time she was ever seen again. And so that gives Blomkvist the idea that a person was there, and this person is the reason why she disappeared. He doesn't know how, but there's someone there who terrified her so much.
And, Fincher does a great job, and so doesn't the writers, to, keep you on the edge of your seat. Like, who could it be? Is it someone in the family? Is it an outsider? Is it even Heinrich himself? Did he do it? But what we find out later on, this is obviously a big spoiler, is that it's actually Martin, played by Stellan Skarsgård, who seems like the most normal of everyone in the family, and he does a phenomenal job putting on the show that he's not actually a serial rapist and serial killer.
Yeah, he has a partner. He seems to be very charming. And he seems like a kind and decent man. He's now running the company as the head of the company, and he's also Harriet's brother.
There's this great scene where Martin and Mikkel are talking in Martin's home, and they're just talking in the middle of the scene. All of a sudden, there's like this loud scream or something, and Martin replies...
It sounds kind of like wind.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like wind, but it could sound like screaming, or it's like muffled screaming. And he goes, "Oh, must have left the windows open." And we don't realize that it's because he's got a woman in the basement, which he talks about later on.
Yeah, they're just drinking wine with his partner, and the woman he's partners with has been dating him for a long time, and she is totally unawares of who he really is. And this leads to, while Lisbeth is investigating in the next town over, Mikkel becomes suspicious of Martin and goes to his house and breaks into his home and starts looking for any kind of clues that could help him out. And then Martin arrives home, and so Mikkel has to get out of there. And there's this great scene where Mikkel escapes the house, and he's in the backyard, and he's moving down through the woods, and then he makes a really loud sound by stepping on a branch, and he falls over, and then this helps Martin discover him. And so Martin finds him in the yard, and he's very polite and nice and charming, and he's like, "Come on in for a drink." And it's this great moment where Mikkel knows there's something really wrong about Martin, but he still goes inside for a drink out of politeness. And then we discover Martin really is the killer when he pulls a gun out and leads Mikkel into the basement.
And he even talks about that. Like, Martin talks about how it's like, you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, even though you feel in danger, which is an explanation of how he lures a woman into his life to be able to capture them. He kind of makes fun of Blomkvist for falling into this trap where he's like, you knew something was wrong, you suspected me, but you still came into the house.
Yeah, he says that the fear of offending is more powerful than the fear of death. And so you're right, he makes fun of him. And it's actually true. People, we talked about it before, people can sometimes be unnecessarily nice in circumstances when they shouldn't be nice and polite. And it's a really disturbing scene when we see what Martin's kill room is like. And it's so well engineered and designed that it's just terrifying because you can only imagine how many people has this guy killed, because he seems to have it down to a T. It's impossible to ever catch this guy. The way he has this room set up, and then he has that incredible moment where he hangs Mikhail up by rope, and then he wraps a bag over his head and suffocates him playfully. And this scene, they actually did tie bags over Daniel Craig's face and head and suffocated him over and over in scenes. And one take went so long that Daniel Craig actually passed out from the lack of oxygen, and they had to literally save him. And then I think David Fincher that day let him go home early because of it.
That's what happens when you work on a Fincher film.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Lisbeth Salander, she had been figuring out in a different way that it was Martin, following other tracks, and she comes to the rescue and saves Mikhail Blomkvist's life. And then we have that badass chase scene where she smashes him in the face with a golf club, and then his face is all messed up, but then he's driving away, and then she chases him on the bike, and then, his car flips over, and then she watches him burn alive and blow up in the gas station, and it's so cool. And then we get the great shot that Fincher does of the gun with her pants in the fire in the background, which was used on posters and stuff. So it's a great image.
Yeah, most of that scene is CGI, and especially the scene with Lisbeth and the gun that's actually shot in front of a green screen. But I love how the explosion didn't kill Martin, and you can hear him screaming in agony from the pain of the burning alive, and I think that's what he deserves. That kind of pain
Forever.
Yeah. But then this film, this is not the end of the film by a long shot, because after this, Lisbeth sets about her own scheme where she ends up hacking into Weinerstrom's bank accounts, and she transfers $3 billion of his money into her own private account. And this is a way of her not just getting back at someone who deserved it and a criminal, but also helping out her new friend, Mikhail, who she's developed feelings for. And she develops even more feelings because one of the most important moments in the film for Lisbeth is after the climax, they have coffee together, and Lisbeth asks him for $50,000, and she can't tell him why she needs it, but she just needs it. And Mikhail says without hesitation, "Yeah, sure, no problem." And it's the first time anyone's ever trusted her that much in her life.
And also, at the same time, Mikhail, he solves the case of Harriet for Heinrich and reveals and figures out that Harriet never died. She escaped that island. She escaped her brother Martin and has been living that life of somebody else. And he reunites the two together, and she finally comes home to Heinrich.
And ironically, she's been sending him the flowers every year as a way to show her that she's still alive, and he misunderstood it.
Yeah, he thought that it was the killer taunting him.
Yeah. So it's a minor misunderstanding.
But this is such a good movie, and the Swedish versions are great. They made all three of those with Noomi Rapace, who actually has had a great career in Hollywood too, and she was even in Prometheus, and so she's a great actress. And they asked her to be in this, or a lot of people wanted her to be in this, but she turned it down, which I think was a wise decision because it wouldn't have felt right to be the same character in a different franchise of artistic direction.
Yeah, exactly, and I'm sure she was done with playing that role after doing 3 films as one character.
Yeah, and then Claire Foy got a shot at it this past year, and I haven't seen the film, but it's supposed to be really good. And I mean, she's such a phenomenal actress.
Yeah, she's great. And I'm so disappointed that this film didn't find success because it canceled their plans of the trilogy with David Fincher directing. And that was the main reason for him signing on to this film, was because he had grown tired of all these superhero movies where they always play it safe. It's always the same movie over and over again, same storyline, same 3-act structure. And he was extremely enticed by this film because it offered him the opportunity to make an adult franchise of movies in which he could make it hard R and create intense stories and dark themes for a franchise.
It still made a good amount of profit, so I'm surprised they didn't go through with it. I mean, it
wasn't enough.
$230 on 90, so that's
no. But with a production like that, you get a factor in. They spent $40 million at least on marketing.
True.
And then when a movie comes out, you can't take the box office as straight money going to the studio. For the first 2 or 3 weekends, the studio splits money with the theaters 70-30, so the theaters get 30% and the studios get 70%, which is why studios want movies to make so much money on opening weekends. And then after the second or third weekend, the balance goes back to 50-50 and then even 40-60, so the theaters end up getting more percentage of the movie's grosses as the weeks carry on. And so you got to think about a box office, you got to kind of split it in half pretty much. So the movie really made for the studio $110 million on a budget and marketing budget totaling $150 million. So it was actually a loss.
In the final film in David Fincher's filmography to this point, besides Mank that's coming out this year on Netflix, is Gone Girl. And this came out in 2014 based on the book that Gillian Flynn wrote, and she also wrote the screenplay. We went into immense depth on this movie. We did a Gone Girl versus Prisoners episode already. That's number 20 on our episode list. So we're not going to talk about it on this episode. We decided not to because we don't want to be too repetitive and just rehash out already things that we've talked about.
Yeah.
It was different with 7 because we only talked about 7 for about 10, 12 minutes in that other previous episodes. There was more to talk about there. But Gone Girl, if you want to hear us talk about it for about 45, 50 minutes, go check out episode 20 of the podcast, which again was Gone Girl versus Prisoners. It's an awesome episode, so go check that out. And also, Mank is Fincher's new movie, so we haven't had a movie from him in 6 years, so it's pretty exciting to see, and I can't wait to see it on Netflix. It comes out on December 4th, which stars Gary Oldman, Lily Collins, Tuppence Middleton, and Amanda Seyfried. So I'm pretty excited to see that. It's all black and white, which Fincher's never made in a theatrical film before, so it's going to be cool to check that out and finally get a film from him after so many years.
Yeah, and then just to quickly talk about Fincher's work in the TV realm, where he developed both shows House of Cards and Mindhunter. And House of Cards is one of my favorite shows of the past 10 years or so, and you and I became addicted to it when it started coming out.
So good.
That was the first show I think I started binging on Netflix.
Yeah, I think so for me too.
Yeah, and it's a great show that shows the dark underbelly of politics. We've always known was there, and I know it's very glamorized and it's very extreme, but I feel like it's not so far off from what politicians are really like behind closed doors. I think that we politicians are very much surface level for the public, and I don't think we really fully understand the kinds of backroom deals they make, the kinds of where they're getting their money from, and the lobbyists and corporations that are helping pull the strings of politicians. And I think this show is a brilliant way of depicting the dark underbelly of politics.
Yeah, it's incredibly well made. And I think Fincher directed the first couple episodes, but
Yeah.
he show ran that just like he did Mindhunter. He also show ran that and did the first few episodes. But that show, it's also serial killer based. It's about the first investigation unit who started profiling serial killers for the FBI. It's incredibly well made. If you love serial killers, you got to check it out. Unfortunately, they're not going to be doing a third season probably ever because it basically took up Fincher's entire life for the last 3 or 4 years doing it. So he says he needed to take a break, and like we talked about off camera, like he wants to make movies with Netflix is just probably a great thing for filmmakers, and it's a little more relaxing and more creative and has more freedom. So he's making Mank, and unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to get a season 3 of Mindhunter.
Yeah, no. But the thing about that is, so for example, David Fincher is the showrunner of Mindhunter, and no, he's not directing every episode, but as the showrunner of a season of television, you're pretty much directing the entire season in a way. And so he's not actually directing every episode, but he's very much involved in the production. And so I'm sure that he needed a break from that. And I love Mindhunter and House of Cards, but I love David Fincher movies, and I can't wait for every movie he comes out with. And I think he'll pretty much only make movies with Netflix now.
Yeah, I think
because he doesn't have to worry about budget, because there's so many movies that Fincher never got to make, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with Brad Pitt, and he wanted to make the Steve Jobs biopic film. He wanted to direct that, but with both those situations, the studio wouldn't give him enough money, and so he rejected the offers. Whereas Netflix, they have boatloads of money, so they're just wheeling in wheelbarrows of money for David Fincher to make stuff. So I think it's a match made in heaven for him, filmmaking-wise, where he doesn't have to worry about budget. He can just make movies
for whatever he wants, whatever topic. And that's, it's one of the pros to Netflix and their new like productions in terms of films.
Yeah, so I think Fincher movies will always be made with Netflix now. But he's one of my favorite directors. He'll go down as one of the greatest of all time, and the man hasn't made a bad movie yet, and he's made a hell of a lot of great movies.
And that's it on episode 36 of Raiders of the Lost podcast. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode wherever you're listening or watching at home or in your car. I hope you guys have a great day. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. Share us with your friends. Let them all know that there's an awesome movie show to check out that is pretty dope, that we think is cool. Support us on Patreon if you want every month. You get all sorts of perks. Other than that, hope you have a great week. Thanks so much.
Take care, everyone.